I'm starting alone today. I'm so lonely. Dennis will join us a little later. Um, on a conference he said. I'm curious, so I don't know exactly. Okay, so we are talking about React in this case today. And if you follow our streams, you know that I am a React user myself. So the decisions I made based on tech stacks and stuff like that in the past were definitely always going in the favor of React in the end. And there were plenty of reasons for that in the past, or at least let's say in the last 5 or 6 years now. Before that, it was something different. I started with React with short before the change to functional requirements was. And since then, I was always pretty happy with that, I have to say. So first we started with Create React App, then later we went over to Next.js. And since then, we stayed there and actually not in a single project. So in the agency part, we were basically, which isn't very much what we do anymore, is still the case. And in the project part, where we basically build our own SaaS products and platforms for business to business, we still use it. So that's actually the point. Today, the interesting part is actually, is it still a good choice? So a lot have changed since the last 5 years. Actually, quite a lot has changed. And would I, as a person who is involved into those decisions, go again with a decision in the direction or in the favor, yeah, in the favor of React, I could say. And this is actually something I want to talk about today. Of course, this is something I can't solve in a session, right? So everyone, this is very contextual and all this kind of things. But React is still something very important when you take a look at social media. If you take a look at what companies are actually doing, you see quite a lot of let's say, companies still using React. But somehow, and this is the perception I have, companies using React are not really talking much about that, but just doing. So this is my personal perception. Leave in the comments if you have another view on that. And I think the point is that React is became some form of workhorse, like jQuery was it back in the days when it comes to newer projects or creating a new project, refit project, something like that. And these days it's often React, sometimes Vue, and sometimes Svelte, of course. But React is somehow always this. Are people are just doing that? They're doing that with Next.js. They're doing that with Vite. They're doing that with just Create React apps still in some companies, and all seem to be neither happy nor or sad. It seems a little bit like they are just doing things, and this is how I perceive it. And this is why I wanted to talk about today, because there are alternatives actually to React. There were alternatives to React for quite a while, and it is not so bad. It's not so much today about those alternatives. It is more about if React would outplay them again because of the old reasons and what have changed. So I've prepared some questions. They were in the description of the show today, and those questions are actually directed to myself. And I need to ask them still. I haven't done it so far, and take a look at when I ask them myself, what comes up actually when I'm start to thinking about that. The idea was to do that with Dennis. I hope he's joining soon, so we can do that together, because he has a different experience set regarding React in his coaching sessions, and we can have that as a second idea about he would see it in that moment, right? Okay, so what drove me in the past to pick React in this case, that was clearly that it was a solid use. So, which means that if you were taking a look at surveys like State of JS, if you were taking a look at what people were recommending to that time, let's say 5 or 6 years ago, people tended to call out React. It was the trending thing. It was the solid thing. It was use the usage, especially the usage is important to me, to be honest, because the usage displays not only the interest with what will come in the future, but what it is right now. And the more people use it right in that moment, let's say, the more solid the current foundation actually is. And I was used to things like prototype.js, and we still maintain a project which is based on that archaic library. And let's say I know that things will stay and don't vanish just overnight. And the same with jQuery and all that kind of things. So as soon as you reach a level where things are used to a certain degree, in my opinion, they are worth following. And things which are rising stars right now, but not yet used for such a long time or for a decent amount of time, they are actually not the picks I prefer to do. And the reason behind that is I take a lot of, let's say, emphasis, or put a lot of emphasis onto the economy and the ecosystem around technology, which means that how many people are actually available, how difficult is it to get people onboarded to use that kind of technology and to make something out of it, right? So that was probably one of the reasons I loved Zen Framework back then when I used PHP, because it was there was an idea behind that, like a model view controller idea, and that was very tempting when you came from basically no idea to some idea, and it was actually working. So it was working that you got people to a degree that they were actually able to join you and join your company and quickly find a way into development. And that's actually one of the most important things you can have. So back to React in this case, is React now a let's say a library, a programming paradigm which is still current, right? And it was current back then because it was very simple, right? It was very simple and very complex at the same time. So those are basically one of the downsides, but I need to really get to my questions. I will share it because this probably makes more sense if I do that. And now I hope to find the right one. It does work. Let me quickly fix for you the background because I think this is pretty annoying. There it is. Okay, so a little Miro sheet for this show. So to solve the question today for myself, is React a good choice in this year currently, right? And why do I actually ask the question for myself? Because most companies, and I myself, my own company, we are starting projects here and there again. So there are companies, of course, they just have one project, one code base, and they're doing that for 10, 15 years. That's okay, and that's what most companies actually do. But oftentimes you start spin-off, new projects, greenfield projects, brownfield projects, and you need to decide how you want to build your front end. And these days, there are actually quite loud voices, and I hear them basically everywhere. It's about the idea of, hey, web standards are that good right now, so why not just return to them and don't use something like React, Next.js, Vite, or something like that, and avoid the npm package storm and stuff like that. All the problems we get with that, large bundle sizes, actually don't caring about bundle sizes anymore. And this will be part of the show today as well, and why I actually like the idea. But it's one thing to like an idea, and it's one thing to go with that idea, because there are some downsides to that as well. And the first one is already what I've discussed in the very beginning, is the capability of being able to onboard people. Because one of the big things, the big, let's say, the whys for React for me were that it was actually a form of pattern, a paradigm, right? And it was easy to onboard people for this paradigm. But if you don't have a paradigm, or let's say you have a paradigm, but it is unknown to the people who join you, because you have created the paradigm all for yourself, in your own code base, you say use standards, but actually there are no standards for this. So there are standards what JavaScript is, what CSS is, what the browser is, what a browser engine is, a server, an API, HTTP. All those are defined and specified, specifications. But they are not paradigms, not really paradigms. So HTTP, yeah, HTTP is a protocol, but it's a network protocol. It is not protocol. It is not defined how you use it to receive APIs. So, for example, GraphQL and REST are totally different, and the stuff we have done before REST was ridiculous differently. You can do that. You can submit just big, I don't know, base 46 strings and do something with that. You can use protocol, but the schema inside the API layer in this case is what you make out of it, right? It is not defined anywhere. This is what you do. And the good thing with things like React or on server side, there are other frameworks or libraries, but React itself does bring this idea of this paradigm. So if you go to react.dev, right, which is actually quite a cool site to learn things about this paradigm, I quickly post it here. And then I show it. I'm going to the comments, guys. If you have any questions, feedback, or just want to say something, please let us know. I will go through the comments, I promise. But this side is very important to know because the idea is, if you read this site, for example, and if you have read this site for Next.js, you're actually able to, and you understand those things, of course, right? And you understand how TypeScript is working and stuff like that. You're actually able to join, because in the moment when you don't move yourself too far away from the standards, how they're meant to be, the paradigm actually, then it's quite easy to onboard new people. It is there is not much to explain. If you additionally use something like CodeScene, like Ndepend or something like that, to take a look if your code quality is still good and you follow other best practices, it is actually quite easy, surprisingly easy to onboard people. And I came from an area where we actually had real problems to onboard people in the past. So we had a lot of legacy systems. We built a lot of systems back then on JavaScript already. And those systems, for example, they were, let's say, we weren't let's say the older generations developer know that still you have some PHP or C# and that generated some JavaScript maybe, and you had maybe some files which were running. But we were one of the first people who actually thought that JavaScript is actually a client or can create a client. So we actually instanced an entire application, which we back then built with Prototype.js, because the standardization of JavaScript wasn't very good at the time. And that was great to do, but there were no pattern for this. No one knew a pattern back then. We were just doing as this was a gut feeling, actually. So that was, we thought, best practice, right? But let's say in hindsight, I would say it wasn't best practice. It was something we have just done, and the software still exists today, and we treat it as legacy, at least partially. And when then, of course, there were already Angular and stuff like that, but React was the first time we encountered something which was very standardized and felt very good in that moment. So it felt like, hey, there is an entire paradigm we can follow in order to make things better. Well, it took one or two applications to actually understand the paradigm, because I wasn't one of the people who read the manual first, let's say. This is why I recommend read it first. And my colleagues, my peers did that as well, like this. And but then we came to the point that actually React was this pattern which solved this big puzzle, where we really thought, hey, now we can start to recruit and scale. So that was basically just for the history now. But let's quickly get into the current comments, and then I go into the first question. Oh, there is someone joining us.
Hello.
Hello. the conference goer.
Yeah. Oh, it was my first conference, since the kiddos. So it felt good getting, out of the house for business reasons. So sorry, I'm late.
No
I
problem.
just got back from the conference hotel with a taxi during rush hour in the industrial commercial part of the city, and it's something I didn't expect and didn't account for.
No problem.
Oh,
Yeah, I already introduced with a little bit of history how we came to React and what was before. What were
okay.
the general reasons why we preferred it, and we ended up just before you came with. I was explaining that I really liked the experience that we could onboard people easier because we
Mm.
introduced React, and React followed a paradigm and a pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And we hadn't had this before when we started 15 years ago, something like that, or 16, 17 maybe already.
Yeah.
With Prototype.js, we were just happy to get something running on the browser.
Yeah.
That was a different way of seeing things, and React changed that quite a lot. This is why I'm so about this pattern. But I had prepared those questions, and those questions are actually meant to ask ourselves after using React now. So me personally, using that in real projects, in real
Mm-hmm.
products, and you knowing that from coaching sessions, right? So that was
Mm-hmm.
my intention, to ask ourselves and discuss those questions through,
Awesome.
and take a look if we would say that React is still the choice
Mm-hmm.
to go with in this year starting from today,
Mm-hmm.
or let's quickly take a look into Solid or HTMX or something like that, or
Yeah.
even vanilla, because there's a big movement to, hey, web specifications are so great these days. Let's go back to no paradigm. And
I don't think there is such thing as vanilla when it comes to templating front ends.
oh,
Like
there
there will
is.
be.
You, of course, you can use templating vanilla. It's possible to have template strings right now to use that. So you
Yes,
could use
but
it.
it's still JavaScript. I mean, it doesn't use a framework, but that doesn't, vanilla to me would be no scripting, just declarative language. Just CSS, just HTML. That would
Blah.
be like vanilla.
That doesn't work. So we still wanted to build something. So
Yeah, yeah. If you still want to build something, then you're gonna end up creating your own framework in the Node.js ecosystem, which is
yeah.
something everybody hates, which is why React exists, I think. Um,
But I promise to go into the comments. So are you talking about pure React, React 19, or React in context of frameworks like Next.js? I would say the latter. It doesn't make sense to just take a look at React purely, because I would say that in the application area, most people using that in the context of some framework. Yeah. So there is still Create React app out there, which is just a scaffolder to get something running with pure
mm,
React. But this doesn't seem to be the big way anymore, and it was more like a starter thing in the starter area of React
mm-hmm,
era. But nowadays, it's definitely Next.js,
mm-hmm.
Remix, Vite, something
My
like that.
experience has been
No.
similar, right? So like there's no such thing as a pure React environment. You will still use at least some form of router, which is not from the native ecosystem, very likely. Um, and maybe Tencent, maybe one of the Tencent libraries, or maybe something to decorate it more easily with Tailwind. To now with the new features with the compiler, there will be definitely some elements of it that you will be using to enrich your development experience. I don't think it makes sense to just use React, so that module.js, so that your package JSON only says React.js and nothing, no other package. I think that's
I
completely
never saw
unrealistic.
this. I never ever saw
I think
this.
that's completely unrealistic, and silly. There's no positive business outcome that comes from that being that pure. But when it comes to Next.js, I think there's a difference. We used to call these single page applications SPAs. I think the really big differentiation is, are you building a application that is login gated, or are you building a website
Website.
application, a web application, right? So the question becomes, in absence
Good
of a
point.
login, does your HTML need to be indexable in a meaningful way that you cannot produce without the application itself, right? So if I have a login page,
Mhm.
it's possible that the landing page is a blog built in something else, and the landing page gets indexed, and then everything after the login, I don't care. In that context, using React and something else makes sense, and you don't need Next.js. If you need your content to be indexed with after the login or adjacent to the login or before the login, and everything is built in one single application, then I would never not use Next.js for that kind of ecosystem.
Yeah.
Especially if the backend is on Node, or Node compatible, or Node adjacent. If it's a React developer working with a TypeScript developer, even if it's JS or more traditional or non-TypeScript React. Yeah. Or if it's
Yeah.
even just something adjacent to the ecosystem, like TypeScript and C# nowadays go very well together, or TypeScript and some form of, React, TypeScript, and some form of Go backend is also very popular, Go and HTMX. What I see the most resistance to is people in the PHP ecosystem going with a fully blown React Next.js setup. That's what I see from coaching that people are most resistant to, because it requires a mix of paradigms that don't naturally mesh well, right? So an event loop based framework with a more request loop based framework, and it's just way too many different hats being worn just to make these frameworks work well together. It's possible, but it requires deliberate ecosystems, like how Laravel has like a full ecosystem for getting the front end stuff done, how Symfony has something equivalent. But those are very specific to the PHP ecosystem. I think that's a beast of its own.
Dan had a comment or statement in the very beginning.
I don't see that far back in comments. It's on screen.
Probably because you haven't. This was before you have joined.
Yeah.
And so if it gets the job done, it's a good choice. It definitely gets the job done. But it's a little bit about the question. There are other solutions.
It needs to be substitutable. It's not enough that it gets the job done.
There are, let's say, other solutions out there which get a job done as well. And the point is, what does fit into your context right now very well, which actually, where you could, let's say, be sure that you can use that for several years, but you don't build your application on the idea of this thing, so you can't remove it anymore somewhere in the future. And this is actually not part of the topic today in that detail, but you can use React very wrong in let's say, in a lot of ways.
You can go too deep or too wide with what you're doing with React and shoot yourself.
Exactly. And this is especially then when you don't use any form of programming principles and you just try to put everything you can into those hooks, and then you end up being very coupled to the actual framework, to the actual library. So yes, it gets the job done, but others do that as well. And the topic of today is actually React one of the choices, or even the best choice still today? But thank you for the statement. Raul, hello Raul. So is that your strategic approach when choosing tech? Yeah. So this is how I actually doing things. I'm asking myself questions. I'm reading a lot. I'm talking with people a lot, and try to be very critical, which means that I really start to talk something down or with questions or question it. And if it basically proves that it's worthy to actually pick it, because it is actually proved right in that moment, it is something which tells me that it's a good choice. And for the last 5 years, I don't regret it, and I don't see a point right now where I should regret it. I regret to not have started it in a good way. So I was very lazy in the first year of React development together with my peers, and that was not a good thing, but we could have done it better, especially the start.
That's curious. I had the opposite experience. I learned the pattern first, and then I saw, okay, which framework does this pattern well, right? So I have seen Mishko Hevery go all in on this reactive pattern, but he didn't start Angular yet. And I knew it was coming. And then I figured, okay, I'm in the PHP ecosystem. I'm in a multinational company where change is going to be difficult. Whatever I choose better stick. What are we choosing? And none of them were on the market yet. So I figured, okay, what do we want to do? Well, we want to get away from this jQuery hell, where we just end up having like pinging back state and callbacks and everything, and trying to like re-render the page, and then every now and then we give up and we refresh the page, and we force the user to refresh the page, and that's silly. So I figured, okay, what is the reactive pattern here? And it was bidirectional data binding, which then later become Redux-based unidirectional data binding, right? So it's this loop-based state management. Okay, let's start that. Which framework does that? And then the moment we were transitioning, React came out, and we just had something ready, and we just had, it got the job done. I think we used a combination of Rivets.js and some like JavaScript templating. And the first iteration of React was a perfect match, and we just swapped over. And that was about when I left the company, and they still use React. So that was an architecture decision that I don't regret. But yeah, strategically, it was very complicated because React wasn't fully out
I actually never heard of a company so far who say that, React was actually a bad choice. I never heard that. They just wanted to find out how they can do better with it. That was quite often, but not later. There was a bad idea. We should have gone with XYZ.
Whenever this question gets raised, I think it's more along the lines of, does the team think React was a bad decision? If yes, what would they use instead? And they would never say, team. What does the team think about using React? And they might say, we don't like React. We should have used Vue.js instead. We should have used Angular instead for this and that reason. Like that, I see as a good, but that has nothing to do with React itself. That has to do with the team has a certain strengths, and there are alternatives to React which would use those strengths more. But those are highly specific to the team, and it doesn't say anything negative about React itself.
Oftentimes when I talk about React, especially when it comes to consulting in this case, and not my own company, and people ask me, hey, Vue, React, Svelte, what shall I pick? For me, it's a little bit like they are all following the same idea. Actually, the other both follow React, if you be clear, if you be precise about that. So they are very similar to each other. It often comes down to preference, and this is the reason why people then pick Vue, for example. They say, I have done Vue in the old company and I want to do that now again. And it's a fair choice, I want to say. So I don't try to convince people to actually use React because, yes, React might have a little bit more of an ecosystem around that, but Vue is not a bad choice in this, or Svelte is not a bad choice either. There is a lot there which you can use, and it is not like a very new rising star trend. It is now solid as well, and it is basically one of the things. But yes, this is the approach I am thinking about those things. And Balázs is here again. Yes, Germany had a problem onboarding people because those willing to work remotely were not really welcome around 2015, and also the advertised rules on when, how much be on-site changed every round of an interview. Most of my colleagues started to work in the UK, US companies or in Vienna.
The comment is longer. Let me fish it up.
I can't see it in the.
No, I'm opening the original on LinkedIn. Thanks, Balázs. It's been a while since we last see you. It's great to have you with us again live. I didn't accept the invitation. Wow, so rude of me. No, that's because you didn't create the event. You create the event late, right?
No, I have created the event. I don't know.
Then I missed it. No, I'm sorry. Oh yeah, I don't see the comment. Sorry. I don't see the
I don't see it either. So I
on
don't know
LinkedIn.
what's
I
behind
don't
the
know
ellipsis.
where did this go. What happened to this comment? It was on LinkedIn. It disappeared. Did Balazs delete it?
I don't know, but we have it on screen so we can talk. I think the point is clear, and yes, I can prove that in German. Let's say 2015, that was nearly 10 years ago. There was not much about remote, so it was all on site, and no one was really taking a look outside of Germany. So when we heard in the US and the UK doing this offshoring stuff, we weren't able to understand what offshoring actually means. It was a little bit like very foreign language to us, and we went into well, what's actually has it something to do with oil refineries on the ocean or something like that. We weren't
Okay.
actually weren't that there wasn't a big thing about that. So still until today, most German companies I work with in formal fellowships, they only recruit in Germany. So we've recruited quite a lot in Poland as well. So, but it is quite hard because you cannot just employ someone who is not living in Germany. So you need to do that by contract, and that doesn't feel very good, to be honest, because you don't really employ someone. There are no benefits, and those people are actually some more freelancers and solopreneurs than actually employed persons. So you call them employees, but in reality they are no employees. And this is not
I'm a
because
solopreneur. I'm very glad not having to deal with employees.
yeah,
But I
but
do have business partners.
yeah,
Right?
but
So
this is based on country law in this case. I don't think it's EU law; it's country law, and it's very difficult.
it
This
is.
is some form of protectionism, I think.
French has the same problem, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
the
Until today, it's
more,
hard.
yeah, Germany, France, and Sweden have the, let's say, least freelancing friendly um, options on, let's say, contractual work, because they do want you to be employed long term and have social security and everything. I mean, the
But this is
intention
this
behind
is a
it is good.
downside. This is a downside as well. I had a conversation
Huge downside.
with Brian Finster, and he told me that in the US it's very different to how it is in Germany. There is this concept of firing people if they don't perform is something very present in the US. But
Yeah,
it's
because
not in Germany. But so it's
because
simply impossible.
the employment contracts are social contracts in the US, right? So you just have a deal of, if you continue working for me, I will maybe pay you pension, and I will maybe pay you healthcare. It's something I willingly take on as your employer. And there are some laws on, like, what are the rules, what is the minimum, what is the maximum,
But
what is the
not
time
as
limit.
regulated as in this
No, like, it is regulated, but it is a social contract, right? So it is even more heavily regulated. You know, the IRS is extremely stringent about what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do, even going back 10 years to doing audits, and God forbid you get audited by the IRS. Right? But in Europe, it's different. In Europe and in the US, you usually get your paycheck every 2 weeks, not every month. Right? So you get, I think, 26 paychecks in a year. Right? You don't get 12 or 13 or 14, how it is in certain countries in Europe. Right? So the idea is that in Europe is that there isn't this concept of, like, part-time work or fractional work, or they expect you to work full-time, because then the social security system and the pension system is modeled around an employment structure that assumes you will be working 40 weeks for 40 hours a week. And then everything is modeled to this extreme, which so if you're a consultant, if you're a freelancer, all of your, like, taxes and social security that you're required to pay makes the assumption that you'll be working, even as a freelancer, for 40 hours per week. So freelancers who work 80 hours per week are, like, super heavily taxed, and freelancers who work 20 hours per week are relatively heavily taxed, because depending on what they get out. Whereas in the US, you don't have this problem. But
Yeah.
healthcare also sucks because then it's a capitalist healthcare and everything is more expensive. So because you rely more on
Healthcare is extremely expensive in Germany, actually. It is extremely expensive. And I'm not sure if it's really more expensive somewhere else, to be honest. It's one of the major problems employers and employees who are in private insurance actually have. It is only good if you earn a lot of money. It actually stays at the point, but if you don't earn a lot of money, it actually can break your neck. And it gets worse. But let's go ahead with the next one.
Yeah.
So,
Raoul.
do you guys believe that React is a better fit for bigger projects just because of its bigger community? In my honest opinion, JS because the way it handles everything. As I said in some sentences ago, I don't think Vue and React are so much different there, because Vue was for quite a long time now following the paradigm of React, was even introducing the ideas of hooks and stuff like that, like React was, and the time where Vue is very new and you need to explain what it actually is and that it's not bad is actually over. Vue is a solid pick for itself and could be a solid streaming topic for itself already, same as Svelte. But I would say that if we speak about React, I would simplify that. React is a synonym for the other two as well. So you can actually use that, maybe in a swip swap. I don't know, maybe. But if you are on Vue.js, this show is not about you to convince you changing to React if you already have your ecosystem in Vue. This often doesn't make any sense. Except you're in an area where you really have problems, you need to find local people and you don't find any who are doing Vue, then maybe, right? But not just because of the sake of changing in this case. This is not Angular. Angular is something different. I hate Angular. Okay. Then, Dennis. No hiring.
No, but you can still be my business partner. Like we can still work together. I'm just not gonna legally employ you. I still have people. Like I do consume services from people. You know, I have an accountant that I have no intention of hiring. In fact, it's the kind of accountant that I'm not allowed to hire. You know, a lot of accountants say, "Hey, I serve a lot of clients very well, and you're not allowed to exclusively hire me." It's in our contract, which is amazing, right? I wish I had, DevOps or SRE engineers like that say, "Hey, I serve many clients, right? I have access to a lot of sensitive information. You're not allowed to hire me full time." I love contracts like that, right? You're not allowed to poach me away from other clients, and you're not allowed to poach our employees. I think that's
but
right.
you are a born entrepreneur. Don't forget that. So most people are not like this. You need to be a certain type of person. Maybe Raoul is, right? He's following us, so there's a big chance that he is.
I can sense there's something entrepreneurial about Raoul. So our roads are destined to cross at a certain point.
I had many mentoring persons in the last time who said they actually want to create products and try to find ways. How can I create my own product? How can I become?
One of my coaching clients that I'm mentoring actively now for the past half year, we had the same thing. They're happily employed, but they had the option of, am I pursuing a staff engineer promotion and maybe it's not available in my company, or build something solo, like an information product or coaching, or package my expertise and do something on the side. And we're doing that. It's solopreneurship coaching for a technologist. So,
but I would want to see building a product and becoming successful as an easy task to do.
No,
it's actually not.
It's a long task. It's a long task.
It's a long task. It's a lonely task. It's a, let's say,
it is a lonely task. Yes, because it's you and your idea board, and then every now and then you get valuable product feedback, and usually it's not the kind of feedback you want to hear.
Yeah, it's a little bit like writing a book alone without help from outside, and don't know exactly where to publish it or publish in general. It can be very lonely. You don't even know if it's working, and this is
Mhm.
actually a problem with most products. You start even as a
Yeah, yeah.
company which with several years of backlog already or as history
Mhm.
already. So we are, for example, we are building right now the engine for a
Mhm.
series of products. Its engine is nearly done. So we're actually releasing that with the first clients in the business to business sector, and we basically this is basically our exit from the agency businesses. So where we
Mhm.
actually build software for others. So we build it actually for ourselves only. After that, and starting after then, we have several ideas. Dennis, I already talked to you about one of the idea
Mhm.
for abstractions of that. So that those are then basically based on our own engine products
Yeah,
we build.
different psychographics from what I understood, different psychographics. So it's more, one of it is more B2B SaaS, one of it is more solopreneur oriented, one of it is more service oriented.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, but this just for you understand because we're drifting away a little bit from React right now. But this is actually quite hard to do that. So it took years and a lot of money to get there.
Yeah.
But this is a good reason for us to then employ people again. So happy to
Yes.
have your applications in the future then in the next coming month.
I mean, I would happily employ people if I was in a business that had a scalable process that I would eventually exit from. But I'm running a lifestyle business. I'm running a business where the business doesn't perform if I'm not present in the room, and it heavily adapts itself to my lifestyle. Right. So if I'm traveling, I'm coaching while I'm traveling. If I'm not able to travel, then I move my clients in that. Right. So one of my bespoke benefits with hiring me as a coach is that you'll always be working with me. Like there isn't some like second hand, third hand assistant coach that you'll be talking to if I'm busy. Right. So it's really important that personal relationship that stays, which also makes it a different kind of business than your, let's say, normal company. Because a normal company
I don't feel
would
normal.
would not sell coaching; they would sell trainings and workshops, and then you want to train the trainers, and then sell certifications to be a trainer and to be certified, and then you would hire the trainers to give them leads, and then you'd have sales training for them, and then you'd
This is a
have
different story. So
and
we
it's a
are no full.
completely
Yeah.
yeah.
So we are mainly becoming mainly a product company. We were
Yeah.
a lot in a mix of hybrid company
Mhm.
of product and agency. But let's get back to the topic. I would say. So I would say we went through the comments now, and now let's go into the questions and ask ourselves some
Mhm.
questions. So we have the first question. This one. What were the clear benefits we don't want to miss? So that question is into the direction of if we don't use React anymore or something similar, what would we miss? And I can say, because I'm partly a front end engineer, or that's actually my passion thing,
Mhm.
I would miss the paradigm. So
Mm.
I think after several attempts of creating the good structure in React and dealing with programming principles or design principles, trying to understand coupling cohesion, what connaissance is, that's the things we've actually talked about. And applying those as a team with continuous delivery and all those kind of ideas in up to the point where we talk about test-driven development, then React does serve you a pattern which is so nice to actually work in and follow those patterns that I
Mhm.
don't want to miss it anymore. If I think back to, hey, you have an HTML page, you try to get your JS somehow loading there, you wait for DOM loaded and try to invoke something. And all that was awful. To be honest, that was really, it was awful because
Yeah.
the problem was this was very imperative. So on some point, some function cost something. And yes, maybe you could start on that function, but if that becomes more complex, you don't know what is going on anymore on scale. This is I'm not talking about boilerplates right now. I'm not talking
Mhm.
about the very first month of your development and comparing those. Those are meaningless in that moment. What is really necessary is after 3 or 5 years, let's say something in that area, you really see if you have made good pick or not. If you still can work, if it's still maintainable, if you can still onboard new people with ease, and if there is a problem or you need to make a major update of of an upcoming version, something like that, you don't hesitate to do that because you know exactly what happens in your project. So React, okay, there's scalability as well. So did React? So maybe we skip that question for now. But this would be my personal thing. The paradigm itself, which is so clear, so nicely defined where data comes in and where it will be mutated. How you can structure your components, that I don't want to miss that anymore. And of course, the pattern behind that is actually reactive, or the declarative way. You have a state. So there is this, wait a second, there is this UI equals function state or data. This is a newer blog post of Abramov. I quickly want to show it, or can share the link as well. So UI equals one state. This is actually the paradigm broken down to the shortest version possible. So our UI is a current representation of a state. We even have some apps where we have just a huge state, recall state in this case, and it's not huge, it's something like, let's say 20 members, something like that. And whatever you set in this state, it will be represented in the UI. This is so nice to test. It is so easy to write tests for that, right? It is so easy to understand. This if you write down this recoil state in a good way, you even have some form of documentation because you know what's going on. You know what is there to expect. And if you play around a little bit in a playground environment, you see what changes in this UI. That's so nice. I don't want to miss that, and I don't want to try to put Redux or something like that into a vanilla JavaScript. No. I don't know. The time is over. Go away with that. I don't want this. But what's your when you ask this question, what would you miss, right? What would it be for you in this case?
I mean, I have a slightly different value structure, when it comes to architecture. I'm used to thinking about this as an architect, not so much a business owner. So my reasons are a little bit more technical. And I agree a little bit more here with Dan's comment, his second comment. He says the future is becoming... that one. The future is becoming increasingly unpredictable. I would worry more about availability of talent and the steep learning curve when such talent is scarce.
But I don't mind in alignment to this question right now.
Because the benefits that the framework provides you is in direct correlation to the talent it requires. So, for example, Kotlin and React, or Kotlin with Angular, is a very powerful combo. But if you don't know how to use it beyond the basic functionality, it's overkill. It's way overkill. Right? If you're only going to use it for the basic functionality, you're way in over your head. Because it will come with configurational complexity, it will come with wiring complexity, compilation complexity, build step complexity. And React has a similar, let's say, similar history, right? So if you're not going to use it beyond the basic functionality, and if you're not going to follow the patterns which would require that functionality, so you're going to use React, but you're just going to hack stuff around, and you're just going to, prop drill and use state everywhere, even when state is not necessary, then React is going to hold you back, right? So if you incorrectly misidentified that you don't need React, you just need to enforce that you're making a landing page. The landing page has to be extremely simple so that we don't need React. Right? Maybe that was the choice. Choosing React in such a context would, of course, be a huge waste. I'm thinking about it from that perspective, right? So, because the talent required might be the page has to be manageable by somebody working in marketing with somebody with a little bit of engineering on the side, like a junior engineer. That is hugely important. If you say no, all frontends we build have to be using React and Zustand, it's going to be a very tall order for anybody on all the other departments that might want to build anything with a UI, because vanilla is still the best choice for that, or a blogging CRM or CMS.
Yeah, I just wanted to tell, because
that produces vanilla.
When you take a look at things like
output.
Webflow right now, and it will become better even, right? There is, if you just want to build a landing page,
Yeah,
building it with your own team, you can do that, but
it's a huge waste of time.
If it's extremely connected to some form of API, because you have on that page some form of we want to do something like that where you can basically order your system and it's there, and somehow it's a dashboard as well. Maybe
it's clearly political. Political. You know, it might be just we're using WordPress or we're using some low-code solution for the website, and we have Amazon Cognito for user management, but for us to connect the website up to Amazon Cognito costs us a lot of money. So we have to build our own website. We can't use the local solution anymore because of the data egress happening, because of the integration point. I see these kinds of decisions happening all the time. This is where I would draw the line with like clear benefits. Right? So there are clear benefits that you miss if you don't use React, but it goes the other way around as well. There are clear features that the React offers that might be a distraction for the team.
Is it that one? What were the apparent drawbacks we would wish away?
That one is a little bit of a double negative that I have to think about. Drawbacks, because I'm thinking about it historically. I don't ever want to debug a UI that has manual state management. Like static HTML that got hydrated in some way, and then it has like some custom built JavaScript fiddling around with it. I find that to be a huge waste of time and error prone and difficult to test. And that, strategically speaking, a team that requires a workflow to optimize how that is being dealt with in today's market has no chance of being competitive. So that is the apparent drawback we are wishing away. I want my team to be competitive in a market where complex UIs that are easy to build are a commodity. 10, 15 years ago, they were not a commodity. Static UIs that had a little bit of animation, that was a commodity, because jQuery and then CSS3 later allowed for that. But the really big, the heavy lifting UIs, they were all custom built in Flash. They were all custom built in Silverlight. They were all custom built in Java applets. And that's the alternative that you're facing if the technology of React would not exist. But it does exist. So it's a lot better not to ignore it. Plus, the JavaScript ecosystem that it comes with, even though it's extremely fragmented, is very rich. So I wouldn't, that is what you lose if you're saying I'm not even going to use anything JavaScript related. I'm just going to do vanilla stuff and not use anything from the ecosystem. I think that is just a drawback of being stubborn and being too Puritan in your technology choices. I think React and similar tools are universally productivity enhancers, and they should be adopted without question. They should be analyzed for adoption. Maybe you don't need all of React. Maybe you don't need React in one particular bit. React can also be applied piecemeal. Right? React is a library. You don't need to use it on every page. You can have static HTML, no problem. You can even have React serve the static HTML. You can just use it as just make sure the JavaScript transpiles and the Tailwind classes get in there. But I'm not going to do any. I'm just going to reload the page, and I'm just going to submit the form. That's all I need. Sure, do that. No problem.
I would like to add. So when I'm thinking about the question, so as I said in the beginning, I never thought too deep in the questions before the show, just to have it for here on for the show actually.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about drawbacks now. I was thinking about sometimes those re-rendering hells, those exist in React from time to time.
Oh, you mean the drawbacks of using React that you would wish weren't there? Because I didn't understand.
Yeah,
the
but
question
it is
properly.
more like I can't say, oh, I would be so happy if I wouldn't need to use it anymore, because the idea is great, but somehow it feels buggy a bit. But with every major version of React and Next.js and something like that, it gets better and better. And now React 19 is basically beta, right? We will have a compiler. We won't have the need for use memo or callback anymore.
Yeah.
Things will change. We will have transitions. We will have actions, which are transitions. Those kind of things. And those are the drawbacks I'm just talking about. But they are not drawbacks.
I'm not an expert. I know use effect. And use memo. I don't. Use filter, use callback, use.
The things are, those things are very good. They still have their place, and it does make sense to use and understand them. But if you are new to that paradigm, you often run into these problems that you actually create let's say, problems, because you don't really understand why things are now re-rendering. Sometimes they even re-render in the development environment more often than it re-rendered in production, and those kind of things are nasty. But they are part of the evolution of React. So I can't really tell that I'm wishing them away. I wish the problems away, but not the idea of re-rendering.
You can wish them away by using Vue.js, because it has a different re-rendering paradigm.
It is, but it is not like
if
it isn't
it really
damaging.
bothers you, if it really bothers you, use Svelte or Vue.js.
The point is, it doesn't.
Right?
So it's just a matter of understand things, read the manual, read the F manual, right, and then go and understand those things and don't repeat your own mistakes, right?
Who said this? I think it's a combination of like Dan's previous question and Raoul's, in that I agree in a way that how to phrase this. I need to really, as a full stack developer, as just a technologist who wants to understand the entire ecosystem of the application, the architecture, it's a huge benefit to my ability to write front-end code, to understand the internals of how React works, to write performant components. And I think that's a problem. But because the inverse is also true. In order for me to guarantee that I'm writing performant components, I need to understand React internals. And the React internals change more often than the external APIs of React, which means it takes a lot of dedicated focus of my time that I could spend in entrepreneurial ways, in architectural ways, in brand management ways. Now I have to invest only in one library to really understand, okay, do I use useref here or useEffect, or do I understand how it works? Oh, I'm in debug mode. What was the detail about hot swapping? I think the first re-render happens twice and is a little bit slower, right? So I shouldn't run benchmarks on that. Like exactly. I need to understand those internals of how they work, so I don't end up making stupid decisions out of naivety by comparing like micro benchmarks for like small
but still, I don't think it's a pure negative. It is just
it's not a pure negative.
It is a real industry, not a web standard. It is an industry standard to use it like that.
Yes.
And so an industry standard is way more valuable than a web standard is, because web standard is more like how HTTP works, how HTML works, but it's not like how to use it. And you need industry standards which evolved by applications, by making failures, making mistakes, and evolve. And this is what you see in React. So when you follow Dan Abramov, for example, Theo, those people talk a lot about those things, and it's important about to understand this pattern, because this is the reason, falsely actually, why so many people call themselves React dev, In reality, you are still a front-end JavaScript person, right? But you need to understand the paradigm in behind, not a paradigm, the functionality, what people call the magic. If you still think React is doing magic, you don't understand it because it doesn't do magic. It is very predictable if you understand it. And this is the very same with every pattern you follow. You need to understand it. So I don't think it is a negative because this pattern, once you have understood it, it works in every company which is using current React. That's great.
That's
Okay.
the comments, so we should probably go.
Let's go to them. So first of all, Zaidul, hello, welcome.
Hey, Zaidul.
We have Kaloyan. You posted some images of a conference today. Were you on a conference? You still?
Yeah, I was on I met Yasmin. So one of the biggest names in LinkedIn strategy were today in Ljubljana, and I said, hey, I want to be there as well.
Oh.
So I met Yasmin Alic. I met. Wait, I have a full list. Yeah, hang on. Richard van der Bloem and a few local names from the region to talk, business strategy on LinkedIn, branding. I got some new ideas because I have a process, but I don't have a very detailed strategy. I would like my LinkedIn strategy for the stream and for my newsletter and for my coaching business in general.
We all have this problem that we constantly working on.
I'm an engineer, right? So I have a process, but my process is not very good strategy. It just helps me sort of build my time efficiency, but my strategy is not very good, and then I just blame the algorithm or I do some silly resistance related things like blaming the algorithm or blaming the
it's always easy to blame all the algorithm.
Right.
At the moment, so many people talking about
there
the
are a lot of
algorithm of Substack and stuff like that.
On that kind of Richard, for example, he runs a white paper, like a research paper every year, analyzing the LinkedIn algorithm. I mean, I think it grew to 110 pages. So they really do a lot of tests and they figure out, okay, this seems to negatively perform. This seems to positively perform, right? So it's a lot of data-driven decision-making, how it actually works. And Yasmin is the number one LinkedIn.
You should do a Friday stream about this topic for half an hour instead of doing that in a React because this is actually valuable.
I could, yeah. I'm doing a Friday stream now.
That should not be a side note somewhere.
On a side note, I think you guys will like as well. JavaScript tutorials, switch to TS. Yeah, I think we should do that. Yeah. Anyway, I was in a conference. Why did you ask me about the conference?
No, and actually, Kaloyan. I asked Kaloyan because I saw a photo he was posting on some form of there were tables.
Oh, I see.
Looked like a presentation.
I completely misunderstood.
Or a wedding. Okay. I don't know. Maybe something in between.
I misunderstood. Sorry.
No problem. Okay, LinkedIn user, which is Thomas 2. Is it correct to say today engineering is about patterns regardless of front end or back end, and we have to know and learn these patterns? That's the most important. And React Vue Svelte gave us samples for the front end. We have an abstractions, just like programming. EGC as language is an abstraction for assembler. Yeah, I would say that React is a paradigm, so it's not really it is a pattern on some point, but it's more. It's defined as a paradigm, and so technically it's a library, but it follows a paradigm. So in order to use it, you need to follow a paradigm. I would not say that React itself tells you how to implement design patterns, right? Like Yagni, like those things, right? It doesn't tell you how. It just brings its own paradigm. So you have a component, you have hooks, you have higher order components, you have memos, effects. How to assemble them is actually, you can, especially with Airbnb linting rules, you have specific, let's say you narrow it down to a very specific way. But how you actually say that components, for example, are in the idea of coupling and cohesion in relation to each other is still up to you. So React doesn't tell you you need to do that with prop dilling, you need to do that all in one folder, or you can build huge components and still React works. Not very well on scale, but it does work. And so I would say that React does give us a pattern or paradigm. So let's just pick yourself what you want to call it. And you should learn those patterns, as we already had that with Nicolas, with all those people on the stream, where we were talking about those patterns. Those patterns are universal important. In my opinion, I don't know how you think about that, but my opinion, you should know them, even though you don't need to always apply them, but you need to understand them while you apply things in order to make real engineering out of that. This is how I see it. So it is universal, no matter what you actually do in form of implementation in that very moment. Yeah. No.
We are reading in the book club. We're reading Domain Modeling Made Functional, and it has us sort of explore the design space from the perspective of a functional language, of a declarative language, which the React paradigm is. React doesn't bring a new paradigm. There's nothing new about React. It's just a declarative language in an imperative language, right? So it just forces you to write declarative code in an imperative one. But that's not React specific. That's just, functional programming, right? So you never create an instance of your component. You never say, give me a new instance of that component class.
No, it is just defined. It should be there.
That's what's happening in the background. But it's been coated away with a layer of sugar so that you're not allowed to do that, because there's some very important performance implications that happen if you control instantiation, which is a functional programming paradigm, not a React one. Right? So functional programming, and I'm mentioning this in the context of the book club that we're doing right now, because this book that we're reading has helped me sort of see the light on domain-driven design having a similar issue, where people ask the same question. Engineering is about patterns. Domain-driven design is about patterns. Backend engineering is about patterns. Systems design is about patterns. Software architecture is about patterns. No, it's not about the patterns. I wish the patterns would go away, because people are overusing design patterns without really understanding engineering.
So maybe I was I made a mistake. I was thinking about principles somehow, not patterns.
Yes,
so.
the principles apply, but usually people like sort of, when I apply this principle, that pattern emerges, and I'm doing this principle to get that.
No, I wouldn't say that principles and patterns are very connected. I disagree. I just mixed up somehow. I don't know why I mixed up.
Fair. Yeah.
For this is what I said. For example, Nicolas Oquette, because I was totally in designer programming principles, and the patterns are like playbooks. You follow them. The principles are ideas you need to understand while implementing. This is. I just mixed the words. Sorry.
So I agree.
Yeah.
I agree with what Thomas said in the second half. Right. We have an abstraction, and that's it. I agree with this, right? Because what is an abstraction? In a functional programming language, your most valuable abstraction is a type of a function, is a type of data transformation. Most of us in the web space, most of us, and I'm not generalizing, this is fact, most of us are coming from Java-like object-oriented languages, which means we are not used to thinking about patterns, about paradigms, about types as a single function that converts state from stage 1 to state 2. So before, after, step 1, step 2. Form stage 1, form stage 2. Before post, during post, after post. No fetch first render, fetch request pending, fetch request arrive. We're not used to thinking about those transformations in the most primitive form, which is a type of a function. React is forcing you to think that way. And most of us, having come from a class-based, inheritance-based, object-oriented language, are not used to thinking about those concepts in those simple terms. And React is forcing you to do so.
Mm-hmm.
Even React itself, the team itself, didn't think this way. React came out 2013. They were thinking in these like very old dysfunctional ways until 2017. 2017, when JSX came out, they dropped this idea of having class-based components.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the paradigm shift.
Yeah.
So that's just the current generation of React. React was not always like this.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the current best practice. If you
And
were
it doesn't
building-
mean it will stay in the next 10 years like it
Correct.
is right now. That's
Correct.
the point.
And at that time, using classes was the best thing you could do with React because there was no alternative. But because you were using classes and the code was extremely verbose, I would be much more bearish on using React because of the verbosity it brings.
Yeah.
So now that we went from class-based components, which is a huge mess, the did on component mount, did component dismount, all of the state management that everybody was doing manually and then sort of hooking around, like how do I clean up and how do I make sure I have I'm unsubscribing from all the React stores and everything. Like that was a huge mess. When I saw that, I was like, God forbid you use React in that way. I would much rather you use clean vanilla JS or something simpler, and that was React. React from 2014, I would not recommend to you unless you had like a really enterprise level hard problem that requires that level of complexity. The same thing as with domain-driven design. You have a simple blog, I wouldn't recommend you EventStorm with 20 people in your organization,
Mm-hmm.
right? But the problem is that the old React was this huge thing that didn't scale down. It didn't scale down to a single developer. A single developer would have to carry like this huge build pipeline behemoth to just make it work. And that's where it got its reputation from. But it's no longer that. In 2017, there was a huge shift. 2019, with the introduction of like better fetch mechanics, it made an even better improvement. And that's the last time I used it professionally. And then 2020 and 2022, and now 2024, when we have React 19 with the compiler, and Next.js, like spin-off in the meantime, huge improvements.
Yeah.
Right, so most of the things you know about React are dated. They're old advice from 2021. Advice about React from 2021 is dated, right? And I see a lot of those being repeated. And I see a lot of those patterns and advice being repeated. And it's not correct anymore, right? So
You need to stay up to date. That's very important.
Exactly. So my suggestion would be, forget the patterns. The patterns will change. React changed in the last 7 years to the degree where it went from, I recommend you never use this unless you have to please use this all the time, even at the risk of overusing it.
That is the reason why it's so important that you're able to refactor your code constantly.
Yes.
Because otherwise, if you have this typical non-continuous delivery workflow, non-trunk-based development, non-TDD, where you don't have the confidence to refactor, you don't have the budget and time. That's actually hellish.
So what's more important is that even if React is not a good solution for you right now, or if it is a solution and that there's some compromises, there's some trade-offs, the number one thing you should optimize is being able to easily upgrade to the next React version.
Yeah.
Because it'll keep getting better. So if you have an alternative like Angular was a huge bullet to the knee to all the Angular 1. Because then when Angular 2 came out, there was no easy upgrade path. Because Angular
this was a rebuild.
Yes, but the point was JS, like this idea of a virtual DOM and JSX was available because React did it. And Angular had the chance of going that way. And they said, no, we're not going that way. That's a fad. That's silly. And then it wasn't. And then that decision architecturally made Angular 2 basically capitulate and just rebuild everything with like a virtual DOM, or at least some form of shadow DOM underneath, which made it backward incompatible for an upgrade path. And that's what killed the trust. I'm waffling. And that's what killed the trust in Angular. So, when you highlight the question that you have in the context of Thomas's comment, I would say, never mind the React patterns. Never mind the current paradigms that are good for React. Focus on modeling your domain. Focus on modeling your UI correctly. Identify what you need to build your UI. I need an animation that is really important to me. I need an animation that stops, shows a pretty input box, and then when I type, I want it to move away. If that is really important to you, learn how to decompose that behavior into types. Learn how to decompose that behavior into state changes. And then see if React helps you build that UI around that more easily, if it makes it more testable, if it makes it more accessible, if it makes it easier to integrate with your design system. That's what you should be asking yourself. But these things about React has patterns, learn the patterns. No, the patterns will change. You have no business learning these patterns. If you're sitting down now learning these patterns, you're already behind the curve. You're already late to it. You can learn the patterns, but I would urge you to model your business problem first and then see how the patterns are and which patterns are making it easier to implement.
I would say learn the patterns, but constantly and not once. It's a little bit like...
And what you need. Learn what you need and understand what the trade-offs are. Follow the React guidelines. React Dev, go to react.dev, stay up to date with latest React news. And if React 19 is coming out and React 16 is what you're still currently using at your application, that's your main problem. It's not the patterns, it's not Zustand, it's not Redux. Your problem is that for some reason you're not capable of upgrading to React 19. That should be your highest focus. Because you're missing out on simplifications of the UI, performance improvements, security improvements.
And it's a clear sign of your defects in your team.
Exactly.
Let's go to the next question. Did React as a decision add to our business outcome? That's actually a good question. This is the question of the questions, because in the end, it's about the business. So what could cause a business to become worse when you make the wrong choice? For example, React would be the wrong choice. Then we just talked about that, or you just talked about the idea of you get stuck. So you created a form of legacy system. You can't move anymore, and it's still producing value, but somehow you can't maintain it. You feel not confident anymore to do something like that. That could be a strong reason to say, oh, that was actually a bad decision. We had that, but not with React, but with a predecessor of what we used before React, which was actually a form of vanilla, which doesn't mean that it's for everyone, because if you use vanilla, you use it your own, you use it your own way, right? It is how you define the pattern for yourself. This is what you do then. But did React as a decision add to our business outcome in a positive way? This question is about positive. Yes, it did. Since React, I can say that we were able to work on more code bases at the same time with the same amount of people. We could maintainability across code bases were basically the same, so it improved as well. And when the maintainability improves, it is way easier to onboard new people, and you don't stuck with siloed people, which in the end makes you possible to actually, and this is the main point, to actually follow the shared goals and the mission of the company. Because the engineering part is a well-oiled machine, or should be a well-oiled machine, which means in the idea of continuous delivery, you deliver constant value every day, every week, you do that. And if you do that, and everyone knows that, especially the business part knows that, it can do something with that and create, because of that engine power, something more of a value. So you as an engineer, you're responsible to create value with a business together with a business. And React actually helped a lot. And to be honest now, because there might be listening or after the show, people to that clips who say, but no, React can't. No, in reality, the reason why React is popular is not because it's a trend. Please, it's not over 10 years now. It's not a trend anymore. It is because it added value to so many large and small businesses, to so many. And I can't think of going anywhere else than because it is a proven system that it works. And this is one of those points of this show. Yeah, maybe there are similar ways like React to do, but I don't see a problem with React because it is so valuable to actually create your engine, create your product, abstract it out, and scale it. We come to the question of scaling as well, but this is my main reason. Yes, it has added to the outcome hugely. That's my opinion about that.
But I think you're mischaracterizing the causality, because React doesn't directly cause business outcomes. React is the first dominant market force, and it's an open source tool produced by a for-profit company, one of the largest for-profit companies in the world, Meta. It is a tool that first and foremost brought good freaking developer experience. So it made the front-end engineers feel like they have superpowers. Because up until that point,
up until they first of all use effects too often.
Yeah, again, old React, no comment. Old React was not a huge step up. Current React, huge step up. But going from a large jQuery project to a large React project on old React, I take old React any day. Small jQuery project versus old React, jQuery not that bad. The point is that new React, the more functional React, declarative React, the one that is now sort of clamping down on the amount of stuff it does and is being sort of split up more piecemeal into smaller packages so that you can choose what you need. And now full integration into things like Next.js and similar. It scales down to small projects, and you don't have to use it you don't have to use it. You don't have to make your project a React project. You can just use React in your project, and I think that's what really brings the huge advantage. It just gives front-end engineers, full stack engineers, even back-end engineers superpowers. It makes them a lot more productive. They can take a design system that was built for React. They can use the design system. Prior to that, you had to buy a design system template, which is purely HTML, CSS, and custom JavaScript, vanilla JavaScript.
Yeah.
And you would have to translate all of that into your framework of choice. So you had to cut the HTML apart and put it into your framework.
You paid $130 for this template and then $30K to implement that. Great.
Yes.
That was
so now what you get is you pay $130 and they're already compatible with your project.
That's the ecosystem part. That's the ecosystem part.
That's the huge business outcome. But that business outcome came as a byproduct of making the developer experience a scalable ecosystem. I could create a freaking calendar plugin, and you could use it with minimal changes. Prior to that, in all of the possible ecosystems, jQuery, MooTools, Prototype.js, Angular 1, Dojo, they all had ecosystems where you could install a plugin, but it wouldn't work out of the box.
No, it never did.
There was some,
especially in jQuery, was something always
wrong. It
was
transpiled incorrectly. It didn't work with your version of Babel. It relied on a different God forbid you use Moments.js, and then you had peer dependency clashes on what version the plugin works with and what version the main library works with, and then your project having a very strict dependency because of something that happens offsite. And then you just couldn't install it. You could use it, but you couldn't freaking install it without issue, right? So a front-end engineer had to ask for an architect or a tech lead or a back-end engineer to resolve the freaking package.json conflict just to install the freaking thing.
Yeah.
And that was the huge benefit. That was the positive business outcome that the introduction of React into the marketplace allowed. Now, if you find yourself doing such decisions a lot, huge business outcome opportunity for you as a business.
I like to make a transition now because you had a good point, and that is the idea of the maintainability actually, and which is important for the scale of the product. So if your product grows, you want to have, first of all, a good ecosystem where you find a lot of resources you can use, because when it comes to tables, for example, complex tables, right?
Yeah.
Very complex tables in business-to-business apps, you don't want to build them yourself. No, you don't want to do that. And if you do, because you say you're a great developer, then I hope your company is laying you off very soon, because you are damaging the company. Sorry.
The amount of times people told me, "Oh no, I can make the table columns sort themselves," and then you have issues of
don't do that.
One of the rows is a double row, and it has like a drop down. It can open up, and how do you sort that? One of the columns has it splits into two values. The profit splits.
Don't do that.
In one of the categories, the profit splits into B2B and B2C, and it has two values in a single column. But we have column spans, and then how do you sort that? And then you have this like one callback function, and then it just grows. Just
because you could be able to solve this on some day, it doesn't mean that you create something maintainable and great to use. Don't do that, people. This is a problem for so many years.
UIs are extremely complex.
Yeah.
Creating a calendar widget, you should not be paid to do that. Because it's extremely complex. It's a huge waste of time. And they are so fun to build. But they are so annoying to maintain.
Yeah. Now, there are so many caveats and edge cases inside those.
Exactly.
Believe me, you don't want to do this. This is so... you don't hit the value. There is no value in it. This is it's just proving as an engineer to be, or developer in this case, for me, this is not engineering. As a programmer, you prove that you could. But if you want to do that, great. Create your own open source version of that and pass it to the people, maintain it, make it good. But don't. If you want to earn money with a product, the product is not the calendar widget. It is not the table. It is just the aggregation or the composition of that, and use things which are already meant for that. I have that question often. So, those frameworks can cost money on some point. In React, there is a lot of stuff which doesn't cost money because it's a great ecosystem, but you have those things where you need to pay for those things, which when they are very good.
I'm fine. As long as they're well maintained, I'm fine.
And sometimes people say, but you can't spend several thousands of dollars per year for such a thing. We can build it ourselves. No, you can't.
No, yes, you can. Yeah, you can.
You could build it yourself, but the amount of money you pay for that, this make or buy decision, is way higher if you put 2 months.
I agree with them if there's like a caveat to the licensing where it says if you're making more than X million per year, your license balloons.
But this is very uncommon. Normally it's about development fees.
And it's not enforced. Even if it is common, sometimes it's not enforced.
If you can, let's stay with tables. If you go for a table framework. There are some big of those out there, and they give you so much stuff you need for reloading, end listing, and you can go with client-sided tables or something like that. But if you go into, let's say, 1 million results and growing, and then you need to search for several terms, good luck, have fun doing that on the client side. It doesn't work.
And the thing is, the product people generally don't give you. For example, if you're building a product it's like a B2B SaaS product about brand analytics, it's possible that the designer didn't design the look and feel of the table. They just say, we'll implement something that looks similar to Google Analytics. Like, just make it behave the same as GA4.
Just a side example. So if you have a product owner and a business person who owns the money as well and the effort, and they tell you it needs to look exactly like that. The design, it was already approved, and you tell them, great, we need 3 weeks for that. and then you tell we could use that, and it's there tomorrow. Suddenly, it is
exactly.
not that important
Exactly.
anymore.
Exactly.
It's
Because to them
magical.
it was never
in this.
important.
It's very
It didn't.
magical.
They don't go into detail about the behavior
Yeah.
because it's not important in the first place. But what they need to know is that, okay, I know it's not important, so I'll use the plugin from the React ecosystem that I can just install, and it handles all the behavior, and it's even better than Google Analytics. But I can't easily add that custom feature you requested. That's the trade-off.
That's the trade-off.
That's the trade-off. Right? So building that custom feature, that'll take me, that will still take me 3 weeks, but I prefer only doing that for 3 weeks than doing everything this for 3 weeks and more and maintaining it, and then potentially doing that extra feature, on top of it for free or on top of it, very quickly. I would much rather buy something and make this one feature extremely complex to add to it rather than maintain a large charting tool or large table tool or large
Don't
navigation
yourself,
tool or
please,
animation
please.
tool.
This is ridiculous. Let's go to the next one. Quickly, just I would say we go to the section here of questions, and then we go to the comments again.
Sure.
So did React perform well at scale? So I already told that, especially when there are multiple aspects to that. One aspect can be the technical aspect of if your application grows, does it still run well, performant? Yes, so I don't see any problems there. I never saw them. I probably won't see them. And we have quite large applications. We see that in CodeScene as well. And the other point is the scalability for the team to actually work on that and keep on working on that in a performant way. This is the other aspect. So, and I would say, yes, it did perform very well because all the things we've talked about today were already going to that point that it is not so important what happens in the first 3 months of development. It doesn't matter what you use, you are always quite fast in the beginning. But it is very important what happens after a while of developing. So people might have changed, the culture have changed, the product maybe changes direction a little bit, product owners change, people change, so many things can change. But can you when you start a React app, and can you keep up with that scale? Yes, you can. If you don't mess it up, as we spoke about today as well. If you mess it up, it can be, as any other thing, basically a hindrance for you. It can be problematic. But it is less likely if you understand what's about, and if you understand principles in general, and if you take a look at what you do on a high level from time to time and speak with other people about that, and don't do that in a siloed way. And then the chance to have something which scales largely up to applications like Facebook, like LinkedIn, like, all those great things, or big things. Great things, but big things, as well as the very small applications which continue to work well. But you need to be maintainable, you need to be able to update, you need to be able to refactor. So you can't just stay with an old React version and say, hey, all good, we still can scale. This is probably the moment where you can't scale anymore. So you need to make sure you are staying in that loop. And as long as you're doing that, you can scale with React perfectly. I actually can't talk much about Vue or Svelte because we never used it in production that long. But I know React can do that.
I used Vue 2 and Vue 3. I used a little bit in production, so I'm familiar with it. I see the allure. Vue is simpler in how it compiles and how it manages state, and it also creates smaller bundle sizes for small projects. That's sort of the, let's say, tip of the iceberg selling point for Vue.js, right? So simpler projects, it makes a little bit simpler than React. Like the simplest Vue.js project is simpler than the simplest React project, just because of how bloated the default React setup became, and because a lot of people, optimization for React bundle sizes is opt-in because it's making assumptions about a sort of optimal size of a project. Whereas Vue.js already comes with this sort of thinking of, in Vue.js, you're probably building one component at a time. So our optimization strategy is to optimize for each component individually rather than for the project. React always assumes it's optimizing for the entire project scale. Angular does something similar, but Angular does so at a much more enterprisey level, and that's the main difference in the bundle sizes, right? So
But
bundle
bundle
size for
sizes are
React,
very much about the context you are in right now. So it's a very different. Again, when we talk about websites, bundle sizes needs to be small, needs to be very fast. And when it comes
not
to apps,
necessarily. Like it could be
should.
that it could be that you can make your bundle size, go from 10 megabytes to 1 megabyte. But then if you go from 10 megabytes to 800 kilobytes, that will slow down your loading speeds because you overdid it. It's possible that this is not a linear scale for your application all the way down to the smallest possible size.
I know,
Right,
but especially when it comes to just display things, let's say 10 megabytes
No,
of
I'm talking
bulk
about
data
larger
in it.
projects. I'm talking
Yeah.
about larger projects. Like,
But then
there should
it's not a
not be.
website anymore. So websites for me are not large
Okay,
projects.
okay, fair.
Yeah. This is what I wanted to say by apps. If you use apps, you have all those widgets, all those components, all those things you need to do. Yeah.
Jump them down to the UI as soon as possible, so there's no jitter. Yeah, websites
Exactly,
don't follow the same.
and then you need to optimize differently anyway. You need
Yeah.
to try to implement tree shaking, optimizations, lazy
Hot swapping
loading.
modules if you're
chunking
deploying while
and all this
somebody is in
kind
the
of
middle
stuff.
of the workflow. Yeah.
You need to define your chunks. You can say, okay, this specific part of your node modules folder is one big thing. It needs to be loaded up front because then because you have a login screen anyway, and people needs to have some time on a login screen. Then
Exactly.
it's pre-cached on the client with a PWA service worker, for example.
There's
Those
a slow
strategies
workflow,
then,
which is the login screen, so we'll dump more data onto the login screen to make the transition
Yeah.
more seamless and things like that.
But if you pack everything of those things into a website, it will have
doesn't.
problems to load on bad networks.
And this is an issue that stemmed from like the old. We can jump to the next point if you want. Yeah. How can we improve the performance? So this question has actually changed over the last few decades, and I think it changes every few years now. In the jQuery era, we need to contextualize. What was the context in the jQuery era? Search engines were not very good back then. So when you came into a website, you usually came to the website through the home page because the deep crawling was not so good anymore, and most of the highest keyword density was on the home page, was on the main as on index, the slash. And this is the early 2000s, 2004 to 2008.
Yeah, black on black text. Yeah.
Black on black text. Yeah, no images. Text instead of images, or alt text, or hidden text for images so that they can be indexed. This was not in the ecosystem. Google didn't know how to parse text, how to parse. God forbid the applications didn't know how to parse images. They didn't know how even that the text is fragmented because there's some images being used for aesthetic purposes. So the thinking back then was that if somebody comes to my website, they might stay for at least a few more pages. So I should load everything that is important as soon as possible on the homepage, so that then any kind of click to an adjacent page would be fast. Because if they're coming to the website from having typed into a blank page or having clicked on Google onto the search result, while they are waiting, they will think that it's their internet that's slow or Google that's slow. But the moment they land on our website, experience has to be fast because they will attribute slowness to our website for the second click. That was the thinking back then. That was the answer to how can we improve the performance? Well, we will make it look like Google is slow, not us. And then Google said, okay, you're all using jQuery. People get upset when they wait a long time after clicking my search results and then taking a long time to load your project. What did Google do? Google started offering CDNs to host jQuery. So if I went to two different websites that had jQuery, you could you could accidentally reuse the cache from one. You could go to New York Times, they use jQuery, they would cache it, and then when the user came from New York Times through Google to your website, if you happen to use the same version of jQuery as New York Times, it will already be pre-cached. So it'll give this illusion that your website is hugely performant. It had nothing to do with how you're bundling. It had nothing to do
There
with...
was no big bundling back then.
Exactly. There was no transpilers. Webpack didn't exist back then. And it had everything to do with like the social engineering, with the sort of social architecture of how the web was being used back then.
Yeah.
And that's still the case. And I think tools like Lighthouse really capture that, because they capture, the least misery index. They capture contentful paints. They capture first frames. They measure things like dropped frames in case you're scrolling and there's like jitter and lag on the page. Those are things that matter.
Layout shifts and all those things humans perceive, not really machines, right?
Layout jitter. If something's jumping, right? If something's loading and then there's a jump in the layout.
This is layout shift.
But
if something shifts in the layout while loading.
I mean the after load case, right? So when, for example, when an ad appears and it causes a layout shift when I start scrolling to show the advertiser that I'm active in my tab. Those are things that matter nowadays. Those are things that are worth optimizing for. And this wasn't the case a few years ago. Nowadays, what you can optimize for is if there's a video ad appearing on my homepage, does the audio jitter? Does the CPU usage from all the freaking JavaScript on the web page cause the audio to jitter? Those might be things you might be focusing on, not just raw render speed, right? So over time, over the decades, the complexity of performance increased. Now we need tools like Lighthouse, right? You need Lighthouse to give you an index of performance is bad, not because of one thing, but because of all of these factors.
Yeah.
And some of these will be CDN related, some of these will be architecture related, some of these will be load balancing related, some of these will be caching related, some of these will be related to how your certificate is configured. Some of these will be related to how you're making TLS handshakes. Right? So there are now all these components that make up performance. And the big difference in the last few years was that the JavaScript ecosystem, and I think it is one of the few ecosystems that does this, has taken it upon themselves with tools like Vite and similar build tools to try to encapsulate essentially as many Lighthouse index concerns as possible, so that you can address most of them in the build step. So that the build step will tell you, hey, if you included something that I know will drop your first contentful paint. That's why I have this linter rule of you should probably not be doing this, right? So it is sort of bringing back this performance consideration for good front-end practices into like the intermediate build step, or sort of the mid-end engineering, sort of, the back-end for front-end kind of thinking, the service layer on the front-end, on the UI. And I think that's worth taking into consideration. If you're not used to thinking about UIs that way and building front ends that way, build that mindset first. It's not one thing. It's not about package size only. It's about 40 different factors, and a lot of them are not exclusively on the front end. Some of them are the back end. Some of them are...
Especially, it depends on what you build. If you build a website, it's a different part of you need to focus on than when you build a big app, which needs to be updated constantly, which needs to feel like instant when you use it, but not when you log in. There are many voices out there who tells that if you use React and Tailwind, you actually have a large bundle size. Take a look at boilerplates. The point is, this is the wrong place to look at how your application will look like in production, because you don't deploy boilerplates. You real code. And if you take a look at, this is what I'm writing about in the next time, is when you have, for example, I just tell a number now, 100 components built, several functions and all this kind of stuff. On that point, it doesn't make a difference anymore if you load React or not. It simply doesn't make a difference. You have optimized it already to the point that it loads fluently, and you get on Lighthouse your 100, 100, 100, 100. It's not a problem. You just need to do that in that moment. And you need to do it right. You can't just say, okay, bundle everything in one file and download it and then display it. Yes, it will be bad. But if you, for example, use a service worker with Nextpad PWA, for example, is a good implementation abstraction for that. If you load your page, you're on your login page, you get 100, 100, 100, and PWA check. Nice site. You can log in. Everyone feels fine. And as soon as you're on the first site, you have already everything pre-cached on your client, and it feels very fast, right? And this is what people expect these days when it comes to real business-to-business software. And so many things. But how can you improve? This is actually in React, for example, server-side components in Next.js. Now they're coming with React 19 as something you can basically use in a standard form as well. That wasn't possible some years ago. Everything was client-sided only. Now you have it server-sided. So there are so many things in so many ways how you can actually improve suspense, lazy loading, all those kind of great things.
In general, you're not really improving the performance of the app. What you're really doing is simplifying the architecture, right? So you might be doing, way too much stuff manually. There's too much custom code doing something really complex manually, and you can't do it with React unless you simplify what it is you're doing, right? So it is this building it your own way. For example, if you're doing a complex animation by hand in JavaScript or SVG, and then you might say, well, if I just change this to a transition and use CSS3 for both ends, that might make it more performant.
But right? there is something we need to consider. So if you have large bundle sizes, so let's say large chunks, and for example, we talked about those calendar widgets, those large table widgets, and you load them in a chunk, and they can be quickly up to 1 megabyte or something like that in code.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they can, or even more. And you load them in the wrong order and make them, let's say, dependent and not you're not tree shaking them away with a lazy loading thing, a suspense or something like that. Then you load it, and it will affect the first colorful paint. Absolutely. And you need to avoid that. So in my opinion, it is affecting performance in a dramatic way if you do it wrong. But if you do it right, in these days, to be honest, you don't need to do a lot to do that, because frameworks are already taking a lot of that.
There's also this consideration of, I hear you, and I agree with you. Like there are technical ways of dealing with this, but I think it's a waste of development talent, right? Because ideally, what you would do is you would just tackle it from the product side. You would make it stand out first. Right? So a much better holistic strategy would be, if the page doesn't load in under 200 milliseconds, I show the loading bar. And then you measure how often the loading bar shows. And then you explain to the engineering team and the product team, the higher the loading bar percentage is, the more revenue we lose if we're beyond this point. And then you have incentives, then you have data. Google does this, Amazon does this, YouTube does this.
But you don't need to do that. You have Sentry for this. User misery.
Exactly. Same thing with Sentry.
Something you can measure already.
Sentry measures the same thing. But what I'm saying is that don't assume that all of your loads will be instant because you've somehow technically solved this challenge.
No, this is not what I'm saying. I'm saying
that it
can
load very slowly for unforeseen reasons. Yeah. And your UI, your web page even, but especially your applications, your single page applications, they should always account for, well, there's an unforeseen reason why Cloudflare is slow today. So I need to show you the loading throbber thing, even though I did my best and I assumed that my efforts were enough to load it in under.
Yeah, at least skeletons or something like that. But this is
so you should
basic
at least have some. Your product should be able to sort of gracefully degrade into that state. ideally in a way that would alert you, that you would have a span for that, you have a trace for that in Datadog, in Sentry, in some tool that tells you, hey, misery index is increasing.
The misery
And then,
index is so
yeah,
cool.
no, because the Sentry has misery index, right?
Yeah,
It has
misery.
yeah.
Those
And
5
I
bars.
love that. Yeah, I love
Yeah,
that.
they're
you know,
great.
and,
Expensive, but great.
they are expensive.
Expensive. They're really
Yeah.
expensive, yeah.
Um,
So, but you can interpolate that down. So you don't need
yeah.
every little bit of data.
But I would challenge.
no.
I would challenge this assumption that all pages need to be performing at their maximum performance possible for good business outcome. I would always challenge that. I would never Yes, if your page loads 7 seconds and you're not doing anything complex, that's silly. That's really silly. That there's something technically incompetent going on with that team. But if you have if this is the spectrum and you're on the green side, then I wouldn't optimize within the green range unless I had clear business data to tell me, how is it impacting misery? How is it impacting sales? How is it impacting retention? How is it impacting NPS scores? Did we get complaints that this website is slow sometimes? I would always, 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 always have a human touch point for any further optimization, investment into optimization beyond reasonable hygiene, right? Going from 90th percentile to 99, I would always, always, always gather data first.
Yeah, of course. You should always have something where you make your decisions on as a foundation.
Yeah. There are certain
for
things
sure.
where you can
Yeah.
say, oh, the bundle is 40 megabytes. I'm not going to ship that. I'm not going to wait for data. I'm just not going to ship that. I'm just going to solve the problem immediately, right? So there are obvious decisions which are very much in the red end of the spectrum. Those you detect. Those you lint for. Those you sort of do a code review for and say, hey, whatever you added, whatever plugin installed, it came with like a 15 megabyte SVG. What's that? There are errors happen, mistakes happen. Even
Not optimized images are very much often the game breakers for those things. But let's go with the next question because we are short on time.
Oh yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Is it still maintainable? Yeah. So the
React?
first projects, React. So React projects, applications we built. The very first one wasn't, but we actually substituted it by version 2, and until today, since that, we had no problems anymore with maintainability. Sometimes we were arguing about how to refactor things, how to improve things, with different opinions about that. But it was always possible to do it in either of those directions, which means it was maintainable in the end. So we were always able to make major updates, especially when it comes to React, Next.js, and something like that, or even Tailwind updates or something like that, Recall. We were surprised how smooth they were going through. So it was something like, hey, you had your linters, your tests, you need to run them. It was about something like 1 or 2 hours of work where you fix those things which were not working anymore. You had red, those red squirrely lines then, and you needed to fix those. But on that point, then your test ran through, and it was okay. So we never had that bad experience, or never said that, oh, we should not make any updates yet. It is not looking very good. We never had this, to be honest. So people talking about this NPM node module hell and all this kind of stuff. I never saw this hell. And if you are aware of what you do, if you're taking a look at your package JSON and use tools for that, so do you have that packages? Do you actually need that package? And don't use every package you find out there. Try to make, decide if you really need that package or not, and make a decision based on that. If you become aware of those things, take responsibility and do it in a mature way, then those package managers are actually they apply wings to you. This is a little bit like that. So before package management, frontend was not nice. If you needed to import your scripts yourself, that is possible, but who is willing to do that? It's not good because you don't really have, as you said with the CDN example, you lose control over time. So what happens if one of your resources is not loading then because if the resource is broken, and then the entire application is broken, and you don't have this idea of a real artifact which is immutable, which you need when it comes to continuous delivery and continuous integration and those kind of things. You need to have an immutable artifact which you can roll back, roll forward, and do something with that and deliver it to some.
Yeah, you can easily cache those. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is very hard with just vanilla stuff, and with package management, Webpack or TurboPack or whatever, it's actually a good thing.
We saw an example of this, right? So, you wanna see the extreme of package management done right and what the consequences can be. Look at Steam, right? So Steam is the largest bundler ecosystem in the world. It's not Node.js, it's Steam. Because you know what an application is? A AAA game built in Unreal Engine. You know how large it is? Probably 70 gigabytes. Now, how much do you want to download when I'm doing continuous integration on an Unreal 4 engine, and I'm telling you, hey, the 70 gigabyte game needs a 28 gigabyte patch. How excited for 7 code changes? How excited are you about that? Right, so they have solved this problem. They are capable of rolling diffs forward where they know that you hate downloading 70 gigabytes. You hate waiting. Like when it's 7 p.m. and the kids are asleep and you want to play one game, you do not want to wait to download those 70 gigabytes.
Yesterday we were on a birthday and my children were waiting in front. We were basically on a birthday and there was a PlayStation 4.
For an update.
And the children were waiting to play Wobbly Life. This is a child game, and they know that from home. And they were sitting there, and it was a very slow internet connection, and it was really like 20 more minutes. And the kids were running around, and no, that was not a good situation. You don't.
No, it's not. And it causes misery. It causes the bundler, the package size causes misery, right? And we see that PlayStation, Steam, they all have these issues, and they have solved it. They have solved it by saying, "Look, we're just going to give you the diff." The binaries are structured in such a way that we can diff it forward. You can revert by diffing forward, like stacked diffs. And you're actually getting the compiled version of what the GitHub history actually looks like, but it takes up more space on your hard drive. So every now and then, you'll have to run verify game files and compact your disk space to reclaim it. That's the trade-off. And people hate that as well. But that's where you're headed if you want to take this problem seriously. And we have ecosystem examples of this problem being managed, but it comes with trade-offs. It comes with capability adjustments of, our bundles have to be compiled in a certain way.
This is why we talk about when it comes to gaming in terabytes of disk space you need to have instead of gigabytes
imagine,
these days, right?
Imagine, and I linked a Devoxx talk last week. After you left, I linked a CI/CD pipeline about how to optimize your CI/CD pipeline. How to remove waste from your CI/CD pipeline, and you can do this as well. You can remove waste from your bundling ecosystem. You don't have to rebuild everything all the time. You don't have to re-release everything all the time, right? Because what I see a lot of people do, when every time there's a new GitHub Git commit, we recreate all bundles. All bundles get a unique artifact ID, and all the artifacts get updated, even the ones that didn't change, so that they're always matching the top commit, so that the top commit always has a unique artifact. And that's wasteful. But a lot of people don't know that is not necessary. You can just tree shake it first, rebuild only that needs to be rebuilt, then only publish that needs to be rebuilt and link it in such a way that the old packages are being linked when you didn't ask for a full remastered rebuild.
This is what you often do in monorepositories where you have a lot of folders and you only want to build or rebuild things where actually had changed something in those folders, and those representations were then rebuilt, but everything else was staying as it is. So that's.
And let me tell you a secret: a lot of people who use mono repos don't know about this, and they are following the full rebuild strategy. Imagine how miserable they are that they have to recreate all artifacts uniquely whenever there's changes in any of the repos. That's why some people hate monorepos and turbo repo, because they're not used to using that optimization of removing waste.
As long it is not painful and you have small monorepos, it's still okay to do that.
I mean, for small, yes, of course.
Because
but
if you
for
have,
like
let's say,
large,
below 10 services, for example, it still makes sense, because this is a compromise as well. You need to decide, because it can be more complicated to maintain that more complicated CI/CD pipeline, and makes it more, let's say, an ops effort. But on some point, no question, you need to have something. If you don't want to get poor, right? Because that actually costs money. But we need to really take a look at time right now. So check, it is maintainable. So are we happy? So let's quickly go through questions. So Balashed, I still have a bit of weird feeling if talent gets lost. This was a follow-up of his own statement. Just because you need to do other things as well, things outside of your domain. He was stating before something you don't do with marketing. So
that was my comment about the LinkedIn meetup. Yeah,
that's actually true. But I think you already went through it. Yes, you need to have in a lot of cases.
I mean, look,
you should be aware of not
the best
getting your people out of the company.
Yeah, the best usage for getting talent to stay at your company is to merge their technical ability and technical growth with the product understanding that the company needs. Because the product understanding will change, the technical ecosystem will change, but what you want to maintain is how well the people in your company understand how your product is changing. They should not be primarily focused with, the ecosystem is changing, I am aging as an engineer, I'm still using Angular 1, I need to learn something new. And if they then end up learning a new framework without understanding how the product is transitioning or how it's not transitioning because of maintainability concerns, then they will never learn what made the old thing unmaintainable in the first place. So understand your product first, understand what level of maintainability you need. Like you're building a car. The car will need an oil change. You should be able to do an oil change. Oil change being, I need to bump the React from 18 to 19. That's an oil change. I need to convert the application from Angular 1 to Angular 2. That's an engine change. That's not an oil change. Maintainability goes down the drain where you tell senior management that, hey, we need about 3 months to rewrite core stuff.
I would like to add something which is very important to understand, because this sounds very much context-free, because there is a different context. So yesterday I read a post from Mark. He wrote that the vast majority of companies are still very small companies. And I agree. Most companies I know are very small companies, below 20 people, sometimes below 10 people. And there's a different thing next to it. What you just said is right, but if you just have 10 people in total in your company, and maybe half of them are IT people, there's a big chance that no one in a company is aware of that. And this is what you should take into consideration as well. It is not like in a FANG or MANG company where, there is so much mentoring going on. Yeah,
that's extreme.
That there is so much knowledge, there so much more high-performing requirements than in a very small company. And I work a lot with very small companies.
I would challenge that.
There's a big problem there.
I would challenge that, because even in the context of, Google, for example, Google notoriously has this issue of there are parts of the code, nobody understands the entire code base. The code base is so large.
That's not necessary. It is about your part, your code, your own code.
I know. And Google has this internal struggle that certain code bases are not maintained anymore, that the maintainer left or it lost funding, and you ended up having to maintain it because they have this policy of we don't want to have two tools for the same thing. So if there's a tool that exists but it's not very good and you need to use it, you become the maintainer of it. You need to make an improvement on it, right? So that is also a facet of maintainability that large companies face, and small companies can face the inverse of that. In small companies, maybe the company is so refactor averse that rewriting things is much faster than maintaining things. throwing away things and rebuilding them is much faster. Small companies usually have that luxury. But at the same time, there will be mistakes made in the rebuild. There will be speed ups, but there will also be mistakes made. So the same mistake, some of the mistakes that were already handled will repeat in that environment because it's unlikely that you'll be able to reuse the same test suite, which is the risk of doing rebuilds, right? Which is why test suites are important. You can refactor instead of having to rebuild. In small companies, I think the biggest risk is that there isn't anybody who is strategically thinking about technology strategy, and that everybody is way too tactical and way too close to the ground to see very obvious architectural issues, which will come bite you in like 6 months.
I would even say there is no willingness in the entire team to even follow those. So even if there would be a person, it would be need a very strong person who could implement this kind of culture when the entire culture is about resisting those things.
That's what Friday is about, by the way. That's Friday's stream this week. It's about rituals. It's about how the team gets together. Because low performing or like mid performing small organizations, they have this issue that talent is individuated. There is no standard across the team. There is everybody's individual standard. And the seniors, some seniors might be working at a high standard. Some seniors work at a medium standard because they're burnt out. Juniors are working on their own standard or the standard of the person they're pairing with. If they're pairing, the CTO might have their like completely different standard, and then their standard gets applied depending on where their attention is. Right? It's like there's 7 projects.
And everyone is screaming at each other.
yeah, and everybody's screaming at you. Right? So the issue is that usually in small organizations, there isn't a team-wide standard. Standards are individuated or compartmentalized to like small silos
but
of people.
it doesn't need to be. So just to be clear, it is not like something you cannot change. It's something you haven't changed yet.
Exactly.
And this is what we need to learn. But let's stick with the next questions though. Otherwise we waffle again until 7.
Waffle.
Waffeln.
That's Thomas, by the way. Educate Reality. That's Thomas One. Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's his YouTube channel. Yeah.
Okay. I agree extreme to Dennis to focus. Okay. That's
On
actually
domain
German
modeling,
translated to English. I agree extreme to Dennis to focus on the domain and the model domain, but to serve the domain pattern with your tool so you can exchange it later. There comes the components in the game.
Yeah. So this idea that you write down your domain needs first, and then you learn how the tool solves them, and then you create components around your implementation side, rather than starting with components and then trying to cram your domain into the components, right? So
this is
the pattern first. It's domain decomposition first, patterns second. People who start patterns first and say this is what a React application needs to look like usually inevitably run into some React routing issue because they haven't decomposed their domain, and then they end up hacking the navigate bar or the router to sort of solve some multi-step problem that they haven't thought through.
Yeah. I know what you mean.
Right? Because everybody does that.
Yeah, that's
right.
So, then suddenly your state becomes your URL, which is changing.
Yes.
And suddenly you don't have a single page application anymore because you're jumping between pages.
And then something goes into local storage, and then you recall it.
Yeah. Local storage is a great.
We've all been
state.
there.
You shouldn't use it as state.
Yeah. And that's the problem of domain decomposition. It wasn't decomposed enough. No designer looked at the event modeling board or the event storming board and said, "Oh, this is the flow." And the single page application breaks between step 3 and 4, but 1, 2, 3 are on the same page. Email verification flow is like that. 1, 2, 3, same page. And then you leave, and then in 2 weeks you come back. That's a completely different problem.
That's huge. Yeah. Okay. I think server-side components are only for prototyping if you have an app, not a web page. This is Thomas one as well.
Okay. Interesting. You sure?
I think server-side components are only for prototyping if you have an app, not a web page.
Look, I
Okay. I made statements into the direction several months ago as well, and this is when we were talking about PWAs, which are actually apps, and you want to
Hmm.
be able to see, or this is actually my take on that, you want to be able to use this artifact in some places like stores, app stores, or something like that, where server
Hmm.
side components are second class citizens or even unwanted, like the Apple Store or something like that.
We had
And
a we had a
okay,
comment from Stefan, and it didn't come up on. I
sure.
got a notification on LinkedIn. Sorry. Yeah. Go
We
ahead.
will take a look at this. But yes, I think this is one of the points. I wouldn't say it is, if you just build a web app, I wouldn't say the statement is true personally. But if you want to have some form of agnostic app, like the PWA topic, where you don't know where you want to push it, I would
Hmm.
stick with CSR only, so client side only rendering, and having the server as an API layer. So having a
Yeah.
clear distinction between those, both very
It's the best
traditional one.
starting point. Yeah. I
Yeah.
wouldn't start with TRPC. Like, forget TRPC until you're very good at writing types and decomposing like the middleware layer. Like, that's
Yeah.
advanced concepts. Don't start with the T3 stack,
But
please.
but but server side components is if you really you write, you render your components. It was actually one of the things I just posted, is overreacted, the two
Yeah.
React version, the server side and client side thing, and uh, server side rendering does have its places, but it's
Yeah.
actually very
Yes.
good for the website thing to do something on the server side to mitigate performance issues
I
with
don't
bad
mind server
clients.
side rendering. What I'm always, coaching for or advising architecturally is that be very wary when you rely way too much on hydration after the server side render, where you have to be conscious about hydration concerns. If you're server side rendering a web page in a way that you want it to be SEO optimized, please do that. That's very good. It's a very good practice, and then you don't need a PHP backend. But if you have a PHP backend and your server-side rendering on a GraphQL Next.js app, and then your front-end rendering as well because you have an application component, and then you're hydrating that from the server-side rendered middleware that get its data statically supplied from like a script tag from PHP, that's a no-no. Like,
No,
that's the
don't do
line.
that.
That's the line, and that's
That's
you haven't crossed it.
unnecessary. That's totally unnecessary.
Unnecessary.
No.
Yeah.
And the idea is we have that. Next.js is one of the driving forces right now to get back to this backend for front-end idea,
Yeah.
where you have a lot done on in some form of hybrid again, and
Hmm.
not having a clear line. Um, I am not a huge fan of this, to be honest. And I have several clients who say, but I would want to go with server side. Somehow people tend to still think that, or feel that, server side components are actually something very safe to use. Yeah, you have some safety improvements, but overall, the architecture you build comes will be very front end focused, because as you just said,
Yeah.
a real backend is not really able to serve this anymore, especially when it comes to something like a
Yeah.
microservice orientated backend. You will get into problems, so having a clear API can be the better way. I wouldn't chain it too much, because on some point you don't save then any. So if you have any problems with the infrastructure, one of those components, you will
Yeah.
have very strange problems with your performance, and you don't know why. It is so hard to
I'm
trace those problems.
I'm old school, when it comes to this.
You look like old school person. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay.
I want my backend, ideally, to tell me whether it's serving a static page or a dynamic page. Right? So I want GET requests to be cacheable, and I
Yeah.
want POST requests to never be cached. And
It's
then I
hard
want
anyway.
to
Yeah.
put Cloudflare in front of it and not have to think about that. If I'm doing server-side rendering and the hydration process is not being done through POST requests, well, now I have this like huge. I mean, again, the ecosystem, once it gets a little bit better, there will be like integration points for everything from Traefik to Nginx to rolling out their own like middleware and load balancing and AWS compatible
Keep it simple.
components to cache these things.
Keep it
But that
simple.
is a level of complexity
Yeah.
to manage the complexity of having to rely on your Node application as a live bundler for your web app because you're doing server-side rendering. That comes with a level of complexity that will make your, let's say, primary hotspot for your backend more stateful, which means at a certain point it will be harder to modularize it, it will be harder to split it apart, it will be harder to create shards of it, it'll be harder to parallelize the build process, split it apart, create horizontal shards, or go into a microservices architecture, or to federate it in some kind of way. I don't have a lot of experience with like full stack server-side rendering Next.js apps that end up scaling to that degree. So I'm a bit skeptical, right? But I'm on the pessimistic, skeptical side here. I would have to seen it handled well to be more of an optimist on this. But I'm biased here. I might just be seeing complexity for complexity and just wanting to avoid it without knowing that, that there might be a tool that solves this problem off the shelf.
Since we want to talk about experience, so we are building now for 6 years applications with something in the React environment, and we actually have never used server-side components in production because every time we tried, we saw no advantage. Instead, it became more complex because you needed to implement middlewares and all this kind of stuff.
The middlewares and the backend servers become much more state aware about how you're hydrating the front end, and there are some requests that should not be cached because they are carrying like script tags or JavaScript that was built just for this user, and some of them are built just for this build. Some of them are built just for this domain, because you might host the same web page on multiple domains. You might host multiple builds on one domain. You might serve different types of users based on tenancy status.
And there's another thing. A server-side component can be rendered in so many ways. And if you want to pre-cache something, because offline first capability for PWAs, you will run into big problems. So if you get the raw data from the API and you have the entire artifact stored in the local storage, then you can do everything out of that. But if you are reliant on a server, you will run into problems you don't want to have. And if you want to build a PWA and you don't know about that, you run into big issue of rebuilding your app later on, which I recommend. So you are way more flexible doing it separately, so always separate if you don't know, and this is what I would recommend. And sometimes when it comes to website, landing pages, high speed and all those kind of things, it might make sense to use SSR, but as I said, this is not my context, so I don't prefer it. As soon as it comes to apps, I always prefer client-side rendering, especially nowadays we have good devices, so don't forget.
Svelte has solved this problem to some degree by saying, we'll just there's a latency issue, there's a centralization issue with server-side rendering. We'll just solve that by just moving all server-side rendering closer to the user. So it's actually not on the backend server, but there's a backend for the front end being spun up on a serverless function that is closer to the user, almost acting like a sidekick to their computer. So it's not on the centralized server, it's closer to the laptop or the mobile phone of the user, acting as like a sidekick that generates something for them. This was the Svelte strategy, and I think Vue.js and big applications like Vue Storefront also went this architecture because it seemed to make sense. It got the best of both worlds. But now with Svelte sort of dropping its serverless support and sort of like shifting its stance on like serverless first, it turns out that it solves some problems, but not really well, and it's super expensive. It's needlessly expensive. It's not scalable at cost. So plus it just creates this problem of, if you end up spinning up like edge located server-side rendering bundlers, and the bundlers need database data that you haven't cached, then you also need to make your database edge available, and then you end up having to use like a edge DB of some kind, or like a like a MySQL proxy that is
Yeah.
edge optimized, or
Those
a
little
PlanetScale
hidden
Supabase or
caveats.
PlanetScale, and then you solve the centralized server problem and rendering it on the client's laptop, or just rendering it in like a PHP application or like a Kotlin application. But then you replace that and you just replace it with a bunch of expensive serverless architecture, which performs well on the free tier. But once you get out of that, the maintenance, the operability, the substitutability, and the cost at scale skyrocket. And if you're sort of not taking that seriously, if you're not monitoring that as a small business, especially if you're a startup that got hooked into that dream by virtue of you being able to ignore AWS costs because Y Combinator give you a bunch of credits, the moment those credits run out, and they'll run out quickly if you're not being careful, you'll just end up creating a huge existential.
They run out anyway. They are always timely limited anyway. Yeah. And so
like, use boring technology, please. Get away from shiny tech. Yeah. To me, serverless server-side rendering is still shiny tech. I get it. SEO is SEO, but if it's not possible, if you say it's not possible, we need to use server-side rendering, I would much rather tell you, no, it is possible, but stop building your important need to be cached websites in a dynamic way with React. Build them and cache them. Like cache them on the build stage, not on the serve stage. And you got it, right? So it's possible to server-side render, similar to who dropped the link? Somebody dropped the link.
What?
Somebody dropped the link to...
Who dropped the link?
Eleventy. Yeah, Dan. Eleventy. Eleventy is a service that does that. You might know Hugo. Eleventy. These are server-side rendering services. Like I think they are considered like Jamstacks or like low-code blogs where they use server-side rendering, but they use server-side rendering only at build time. So you make changes to the database, you make changes to the website, you make changes to the Git repository, and then they server-side render static HTML that they hydrate with React, and then they serve that from a website, right? But there isn't this every user gets to experience the server-side rendering experience, because God forbid that I need to rebuild something and upload, static web pages to Cloudflare. Boring tech works. Please use boring tech. Like, these Jamstacks exist for a reason, because they are very good solutions to a very specific problem. And it's much better to just cache the really important stuff at cache time and then have it statically on your website.
I know so many serverless people or companies where the ops persons tell me that my team is just want to get away from those functions and just back to containers, because on some point the scalability of those functions isn't really, so people are just worried about how can I warm up my functions, and if you start to warm up from functions, just use a container.
No, but
why?
The warm-ups are getting better, right? So AWS also makes improvements. Like, the warm-ups are getting better. They're always, but the problem is they are getting better.
So pointless.
AWS warm-ups are getting better at the virtue of they have more and more complex tools, so that you can create a config that says what it is exactly that you want. So you cost optimize what you want. But that means that you need to now even invest more time into defining exactly how you want your serverless function to work, and how you want it to warm up, and what guarantees you want, and how do you want it to scale, and how fast do you want it to scale down? How fast do how expensive do you want the passive state to be? How expensive do you want to be how much money do you have to prevent cold boots? How much money do you have to scale back down? Like, I can keep it up as long as you want, but if you want to save money, I need to scale it back down once you're not using it anymore. And then they just sell your certification when that becomes too complex to manage, right? So yes, exactly. And you laugh, but that's their ecosystem. The ecosystem is, we have a complex tool. At some point, we always give you what you ask for, But if we always give you what you
I
ask
don't
for, it will make it
understand
too
why
complex.
very small
And then
startups think they need serverless functions in order to scale. This is like a wishful thinking. They
it
imagine
doesn't. You're
themselves
right.
so big in
It
that
does
moment.
not.
Oh,
It does
I need
not make
something where I can have millions of instances at the same time if
It does not make
I get
sense.
to this point.
It
Right?
does not make sense for a small startup to use serverless
No,
functions.
it doesn't.
Right? I mean, it is the norm for like large scale, like Salesforce style enterprise, like big commerce, Salesforce, I don't know, HubSpot, like big enterprise level integration.
Yeah.
Because you're used to creating architecture diagrams that capture those kinds of flows, and then serverless functions are like a nice fit for that kind of architectural thinking.
But Kubernetes as well. So it's
The Kubernetes as well, and I would say, but there's no business for you, even if you're like a small startup serving big enterprise SaaS companies that are using Salesforce. Still, you have no business. I think this is my opinion. You know, your mileage might vary. You might have like super talented serverless people in your company, but I think you have no business not using, like, avoiding containers. Just use a container, put it on, you know, like, you can still use AWS, you can still use the Y Combinator credits that you were given, but just use it for containers. Use it, you know, use it for the most sort of boring tech solution for the problem, not what Netflix is using to run a experiment.
I barely meet companies who have more than 10 replicas anyway. So it's a little
Exactly. I was in a
it's a little bit high. Yeah.
I was in a, you know, in a crypto, like fintech gaming esports startup a few years ago, and serverless was available, and we all looked at it and said, look, if I have to learn this, like, we are moving very fast. We were doing like that was the best team I ever worked on. We were moving very fast. And we all said, at the pace we are moving, at the rate of innovation, of how fast we are able of pivoting products, me having to sit down for a weekend to learn how the new serverless pricing budgeting system works is a waste of my time. And it's a waste of everybody's time. Because we're moving so fast. The opportunity cost of me learning shiny new tech, no ROI. No ROI in the foreseeable future. Right? That was the point. And it's possible you are considering that as a small company because you're simply moving the product too slowly. And you think, oh, we move slowly anyway, I might as well look into serverless. That's a huge mistake. But they're great candidates for coaching. So
yeah, I think this is something. When we were working with Nginx web service, Apache web service, IIS web service.
Hey, I'm not a fan of Apache. Nginx all day long.
It doesn't matter. So in that time, the shift to something more complex like Kubernetes was actually something to consider. Why it was too complicated in the beginning. So Kubernetes in its first available years for everyone was kind of awful as an experience.
I did it gradually as well. I did it, PM2, like PHP,
PM2.
Node.js.
You can still leverage PM2 inside containers, actually. That's
one Docker container, 2 Docker containers, self-managed and self-deployed, local Docker artifact repository, CI/CD automation, Docker Swarm, and then Docker Swarm configurations. That is super crap. I hate Docker Swarm configurations.
I love it. It's so easy. And it is so nice to use.
And then Kubernetes, and then sidecars, and then Helm, and then things were like, okay, now I need to hire somebody because I don't want to learn all that stuff. Like that's, and then once we got to Terraform, I was like, okay.
No. But this is something. If you are a small company, let's say 10, 20 people, 5 to 10 developers. And you have this, what Dennis just described, you have a problem. because this is totally unnecessary these days. There are
Yes.
platform as a service solutions
Yes.
which offers you to just have one single YAML file, like a Docker Compose file, and they manage everything for you, right? And I have it so often that I see people, oh, I'm so good at AWS. I don't know
And
exactly how
cheap.
it
And cheap.
ECS and EKS is working. I'm so
Yeah.
good at it. We have defined everything in the last 2 years. It is so great. Okay, I'm the only one in the company who understands, but it's so great. And okay, it's expensive, but it's so great. And at some point, they see what's possible with PaaS at the moment, and they're just
Yeah.
looking at it and just they're like,
And
everything
it
I've done the
doesn't
last
have
2
to
years
be.
is unnecessary.
It doesn't have to be a complex Terraform Kubernetes setup on AWS. You can get away with like a simple app spec for YAML on DigitalOcean, and you get enterprise level containerization automation for a few bucks per month. It's that available. It's 2024. It's available, and I didn't know about this. Like, you showed me this year, right? So I'm like heavily. I'm all about innovation in the tech space and tooling and sort of bettering yourself at this engine. I didn't know this was available. I didn't know that this was available so cheaply in a local cloud provider that I knew existed, but I didn't use for a while.
Yeah, and this
Right,
is
so-
especially for small companies. Most
Oh,
of you
it's
probably
gold.
are
It's
who are
gold.
watching that. It is
Yeah.
it is gold. It is really gold. So
It's gold.
suddenly you can just deploy something and do the real DevOps idea, where actually everyone can use it in your team and not just one person, because this person got the honor to do the overnighters for AWS in order to get that running, or paying some very expensive consultant, AWS consultant, helping you that and leaving you again with that stuff behind, right? And this is not necessary anymore, in my opinion. And I really say that clearly. If you don't have a very good reason for AWS, Azure, or something like that, which could be like a media streaming service, but even then, you don't need to use the app things, because they were initially not made for your company size, and you will feel that, and you will waste so much time and money on those things. There is a reason why there are those memes everywhere that you actually get homeless when you use AWS and leave a container on, or just an EC2 instance or something like that. And you should avoid that, because you don't need that. If you just have several containers, maybe a static web app running, then just go with something like DigitalOcean App Platform, and you will be very, very, very happy. And this is nothing cheap. I heard that people saying that, yeah, but this isn't just something. No, it is not. It is a Kubernetes abstraction with everything in best practices. We even pass pen tests with enterprise level companies, where basically white hacking companies pen testing us, and we pass. And there is no way to compromise anything. It's reliable, it's auto scaling, constantly new updates. It's great. I really have to say it's great. We still need to make our session about that. I just forgot that. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I was sick for a month, and I'm still having like some recurring health issues. So I'm getting blood work done this week. I went full spectrum, immune testing and everything, blood testing. So I'm sort of going all in on.
Let's wrap up, because I don't have time anymore. Let's wrap up the last two questions in one. So, are we happy with our decision? And just for the people who joined late, is it good? Go away. Is React a good choice in 2024? Are we happy with our decisions we made several years ago to pick it? Yes, we can wrap up. I'm personally happy with that, and I don't regret anything. We learned so much.
In hindsight, there is nothing that you could have used that would have avoided most of the challenges that you've had.
No, it would be maybe different if we would have used Vue. I can't remember if it was available back then, but I don't know. I don't miss anything. And what approach are we following besides that most right now? I would say, or I know that Dennis was following HTMX, right? This is what most people do. But to be honest, I'm not really following right now too much stuff, because I'm more focused on creating products right now with what we have. So I'm not taking a look for some alternative. I of course see what other people talking about, and I know that still Vue and Svelte, but it's like, it is now standard as well. People are not like extremely interested anymore. It's like just they use it now. And HTMX, yeah, people talk about that, but it doesn't seem to be the pattern for what we want to do.
We'll see. HTMX right now is sort of enjoying Jamstack notoriety, so it's really popular with solopreneurs. But like React, like it's difficult to push React out of the sort of industry standard ecosystem.
It is. It is actually the industry standard. So because even others are
and
orienting themselves.
There isn't a problem that HTMX is solving for the people who are using React for the right reason. HTMX is a very good solution for people who are using React for the wrong reasons, right? Who are using just a way too large tool to solve a way too trivial problem. HTMX might be a better fit if you're interested in learning it. Once your learning curve is the same, HTMX might be a much better solution to you. Again, different contexts may sway this decision. If you're in a very low bandwidth environment, like India, or in an environment where bandwidth is extremely expensive, like Latin
Germany,
America,
for example.
Not Germany. Rural Germany, maybe.
No, it is in the like Black Forest, and this is not nice. It's not nice. I told you the story from yesterday. It was based on a very bad connection.
But the point is, if bandwidth is incentivized for economic reasons from where you are, then you might have a better reason to swap or to start with HTMX, because you're sort of starting with a lightweight solution, and then it scales badly, but you start off light. Whereas React, you sort of start at a higher, more heavy baseline when it comes to data costs, but it scales much better. So that is then a micro optimization that you have to run the numbers for. It's very hard to just say one is better than the other out, in a general context.
But it would not change my mind using something like React.
No, I think you and I are just so happy with React that we just are. We're so biased that our bias is there for a reason, and we have an assumption stack, and we have a lot of experience with it. It would take us recreating that experience with HTMX for the next decade to really be able to verify whether that in hindsight was a good
decision. So HTMX is still a rising thing, so it's a newcomer. The idea is a newcomer, and React, and so I don't have a problem. As I said before, if someone says, "Hey, we want to go with something new, can we pick Vue?" and I tell, "Yeah, you can pick Vue, no problem. Just do it." So it doesn't really make the difference there. So Vue and Svelte are good solutions. Just use it, right?
I would suggest you pick the top three, the big three. Angular, Vue, React.
This is what we haven't mentioned yet. There is no state of JS 2023. Yeah, 2023. It is not there yet. The results are not there yet. People are really, really waiting for that. I'm curious as well how things changed actually last year already. So we are in the middle of the year after that. But still, I'm very interested how things evolved. I think React lost a little bit, but still, I'm pretty sure it's still regarding usage, not interest, but usage, because it's basically a standard and not the most hyped thing anymore, but it's a standard, and standards are always what I am looking for, just for you to understand in the audience. So when I do decisions, long-term decisions, where I put my money into as an entrepreneur and CTO and stuff like that, I need to make sure that this stuff works in the future and works well. So I need to live with the downsides of it, but I know there are a lot of positive things, and those usually outweigh the negative ones. And this is what React, as well as Vue and Svelte, already had proven they do. And this is the point why it's actually hard to basically toss them away and say, push them away from this throne right now, or say, hey, we just use vanilla, or we just use something new. I think if you want to use something like vanilla, I know some people do, and they really like it. You can do. I don't see the point, to be honest.
But however, HTMX is not vanilla. HTMX is still JavaScript.
I just what I mean. I really mean my vanilla in this case. Yeah. So you don't use any framework. Some really say, hey, why don't we return to to non-package managers anymore. So don't use npm. So really have a website like we did 20 years ago or 15 years ago. I have to say, I can't imagine to go back like this because there are so many strategic reasons to not do that. And I won't. There is even, so first of all, it's not like React isn't following any web standards or something like that. It is still a web standard thing. It is not, you don't write directly your code in some web standardized thing. It will be transpiled into something. And that's okay to do because abstractions, if we won't use abstractions, we couldn't use computers. Computers are just abstractions. So please don't blame abstractions. That it's not a good idea. That makes me think you are not an engineer because you don't understand the basics of computer science. And abstractions are extremely important to some degree, of course. Don't over abstract, don't under abstract. But you need abstractions in order to have something stable over time. Maybe you just build a single web component and this doesn't do anything, then you can do that. But if you are in a space where you need to have you are in basically a company which has an ever evolving product, you need to be able to react to things, and then you need to have something which is actually battle proven and people understand. Suddenly you need to scale. You need new people. The last thing you want to do is spending a month to get the people understanding what you have built the last 3 years, because that was a person who is not in your company anymore, was defining some weird architecture, was used to it for 10 years, but no one wants to have this anymore. And you can't just refactor that because this is fundamental architecture. And this is something I would avoid.
What we need to keep in mind is that the JavaScript community is very pragmatic. And this is going to be my last point because I know you need to go and I need to go. The JavaScript community is very pragmatic. And here's an example, because you mentioned state of JS and they're doing state of JS, state of React, like they're really patching it out. The point is, Webpack was very popular. Gulp was very popular. Grunt was very popular. It wasn't popular because it was a good tool. It was popular because it was the only tool that got the job done. The moment a better tool came along, it got dropped immediately. And we see this. We see this now with Cypress. We see this now with Webpack. The moment Vite came out, Webpack is just bye-bye. I always hated you, but you were industry standard, so everybody used you. And then Vitest comes out, and in a year, it takes over the entire industry. And that's just the nature of the JavaScript ecosystem. It is still very volatile. And it can happen to the best, most popular tools. NPM, same thing. It's being dropped right now. PMPM, Yarn. There's GSR right now coming out. There's Bun. Overhyped. But, my point is, it is not the popularity that will determine whether you should learn something and whether it's good to sort of keep it in your talent repertoire of yourself or your team. What's the most important is you should follow trends of good examples of developer experience. Webpack is an example of bad developer experience that gets shit done. Vite is an example of better developer experience that gets the same amount of work done, but with a slightly more constrained plugin system that nobody asked for in the first place. Right? So Webpack was like popular, and then the moment Vite came out, 10 years of popularity, just everybody was like, I'm glad to drop this. Same thing that happened with jQuery. Same thing that happened with Angular 1. Same thing happened with React Router and Redux and NGRX Store, for those of you who remember, like for the whole reactive JS community that wanted to have Redux in Angular. That was super popular, but then everybody was like, actually, you know what? I end up like cool, shiny, but debugging is right. So just keep in mind, you want to follow trends, learn what makes good developer experience. Focus on developer experience more. That's what React is. We said earlier, business outcomes aren't coming from React just giving your business money. The business outcomes are secondary from the developers being empowered to use their talent rather than waste it. The talent is the same, but their talent is being leveraged much better within sort of interdisciplinary ecosystem where an open source developer can develop something and you can just easily integrate it into your code base without spending $30K to integrate a $300 plugin or $300 like the design system. That is where the true developer experience and long-term success comes from. Your ability to judge which tools those are, and you can make a easy litmus test. If there's any tool you rely on that you hate, that's probably not going to last.
Raul, yes. That's one of those victims.
If you hate using Ionic and everybody agrees with you, that ecosystem will be disrupted sooner or later.
I think one of the interesting aspects, because this topic was specifically about the React paradigm, not so much about the frameworks around that. So Next versus Vite or something like that. I think React is pretty solid right now because there's a high usage. This is what I'm so interested into the new numbers. And high usage means that software is nothing which will change, even though there is something new on the market. You don't need to build for 30 years. You need to build for 5 to 6 years. This is maybe 10 in some cases, but 5 at least. And 5 years from now on, based on the current numbers, is totally enough if you have some giant like React in this case. And React is matured, which means that it's very unlikely that it changes overnight entirely. Maybe I'm proven wrong, but even then, it is not done in the next 5 years. It's very unlikely that this happens.
Or like most of our viewers, you're millennials like us, and nothing will change in the industry, but you'll have kids, and your perception of time will change, and 5 years will pass by so fast.
Yeah, but back to the idea of not using any form of framework or something. That my problem with that is that if you want to really build something for 10 to 20 to 30 years, so we have still those applications which are 17 years old, right? They are so outdated. They are so fundamentally different, so they can't really refactor something there. This is a brownfield project then. This is not refactoring anymore. And you can't predict what you need in 15 years. And if you're doing like that, it is technically possible and convincing CEOs doing that. But in reality, it is not. The engineering is not aiming at the shared goals of the business at this moment, because the engineering just want to keep something which can last for years. Something like we're building a statue out of granite, so it will last long. But yeah, we are not Egyptians here. We don't want to build pyramids for whatever reason.
You just want to make sure that you can build another statue next to that one when you see that it's no longer serving its purpose.
Exactly, like without hurting you.
Having distributed monoliths of some kind, or modular monoliths, or going like fully, containerized microservice, so that once you know that it has aged, but you want to keep it around, that you can make a decision not to be forced to work in that ecosystem anymore. Whether that's like a micro front end and you start building your next page in Vue.js and you just allow React to linger in the legacy part of your website, or you do that same kind of decision on the back end, or you wrap a federated GraphQL sort of router in between, so that you can sort of slowly, gradually yoink out with a strangler fig pattern. That then becomes your next skill to adopt, not making React evergreen. Right? It's your ability to maintain systems and evolve the architecture, not guaranteeing that your React skills will always
going with time, we say in Germany. And this is what you need to learn. The idea of continuous delivery includes a continuous improvement as well. And we need to be able to create something which continuously improve, which means a code base which is fundamentally set for the next 20 years is basically the opposite of that. And so the React of today is the React of today, and the React of tomorrow or in 5 years is the React. But we need to be able to adopt to, and then everything is fine. Exactly. And this is why so many reasons many people blame React or something similar, because they haven't thought about this way. So they try to build something right now. It changed. They couldn't, and they were blaming React for that, but it was actually the cultural engineering mindset, or the lack of that, in the own company, which prevented them from moving on with anything they would have built in that time. And of course, it's tempting to say we build our own architecture, our own idea, our own standards, but then you stick with those the next 15 to 20 years. My God, you don't want to have
Standards
this, believe
on
me.
web. The standards will also change.
It changed so much since
There's a new version
really.
of JavaScript coming out this year. Get ready for that.
Yeah.
Like
So-
Java ES 2024 is going to be so fundamentally different from the JavaScript you know right now that all frameworks will jump on it to adopt the new features. And as a consequence, the entire ecosystem will change, and you will, like spread operators and like the abort controller, for example, for aborting fetch requests. Those are all recent additions to the standard. The standards have changed, and that prompted the frameworks to change. Those changes to the standard will continue. Changes to the standard of JavaScript, changes to the standard of web APIs, changes to the standard of how PWAs work. We even saw uproaring like industry level changes on just how Apple's adoption with PWAs fared because of some shaky political ground with the EU. That can, and that was a near miss, right? They reverted that decision. But it's possible that something even worse happens next year. And that will drop, I don't know.
Stay adaptive. That's
Yeah.
about engineering.
Yeah.
So if you build a bridge, right, and something happens to the surrounding environment, you need to be able
look at it this
actually
way.
can withstand something.
The EU said cookies are evil. You need to declare and minimize cookie usage. And we said, haha, funny. And then the entire world adopted that stance. We can get that
But
same thing happening.
Cookies made me overweight. They are dangerous. Okay. I don't mean those
Let's end
cookies.
on that. Anyway, next Friday is going to be about team rituals, particularly those team rituals which are silly and everybody hates. So today we were talking about bad developer experience on the tech side. Friday we're talking about bad developer experience on the Agile Scrum methodology side.
I really need to go now. I have a follow-up meeting.
go.
So let's wrap up. Thank you very much for listening to us. I actually thought it would be a good idea to have a stream just 1 hour, and now we had nearly 3. Great.
Oh, I thought that was a typo.
No, it wasn't. It was intended, but we haven't spoken before. So,
Fair. Okay.
but then we had. Okay, never mind. See you, everyone. See you next time.
See you on Friday.
Goodbye.
Ciao, ciao.
I need to find the music.
The button. Click the button. Click
Where's
the
the
button.
button?